perfect weather, lots of Irish Americans, lots of green. Good time had by all. So good stuff.
Wow.
So highly recommend coming down.
He did bike, by the way, just so we're clear.
Yeah, I did bike.
He did do that.
It was awesome. It's Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney. We're live here at the the New Jersey Institute of Technology here in Newark, New Jersey, and we're also on that YouTube thing. So head over to YouTube.com, search Bloomberg. I think. Yeah, Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Podcast.
All the things.
I'll tell you, you've made it when Donna Russo was in the house, bringing it. Here, she's kind of running everything over here. So we appreciate Donna having us over here. Let's talk AI. Michael Johnson joins us. He's the president of New Jersey Innovation Institute. Michael, thanks so much for joining us here. What is the New Jersey Innovation Institute?
That's a great question. So in the U.S., we have lots of research universities, and there's lots of smart people, lots of great resources, but there's this fundamental problem in academia, which is it's tough for the outside world to actually leverage those resources. So for governmental organizations, for industry, they want access to the cutting edge of AI, for example, but it's tough for them to actually make those connections and interact with faculty. So NJI is an organization. It's a 501c3 wholly owned by NJIT, and the idea is that we are a standalone corporation that's a conduit between the outside world and NJIT. So we make those facilitations, we create unique business models to work with faculty, and we're a quick-moving organization, unlike academia, which is tends to be slower and more difficult to work with. So we're that conduit between them and the outside world, and roughly have about 120 folks at our organization who are focused on that.
Can I just say it's really cool his 3-year-old son is here? I mean, what 3-year-old is going to come and talk about AI? I feel like that just says it all at the end of the day, right?
Yep.
That is the future. So am I a company that goes to you and then you pair me up with something? Or is it sort of the technology that you're evolving and then you go pitch it to companies? How does that work?
It's a bit of inside out and outside in. So we can go to corporations and try and find out what their problems are, what their pain points are, and then go and find faculty who can help out. Or we might have a few faculty that have a very specific problem. They need access to software, they need access to resources, and we go externally and find a way to work with corporations on that. But it's pairing the two with each other. And faculty are really smart. They're really focused on their research, but they don't always have the mind to go out and actually execute on consultant-type projects for industry. So we help form that framework, and along the way, we're trying to help with tech transfer, so getting technology out of the university into products and services, which is always a pain point, and also just generally accelerating innovation and also helping upskill workers.
Over the last several quarters, Bloomberg does this analysis that shows, what are companies talking about on their quarterly conference calls? And for the last several quarters, every single company in the S&P 500 has talked about AI, with the exception of Apple last quarter, did not mention AI, which is interesting.
What's that stock doing now?
Yeah, exactly. What are companies most commonly asking you for help with?
Oh man, that goes all over the place. It depends on the companies. We have some small mom and pop businesses that just want help with trying to move towards technology, towards computers. Right. We have other companies, for example, that want to be on the bleeding edge of some sort of field. So for example, it might be life sciences, it might be AI, for example, and they're asking us to help improve something that they're already doing, or it's a very specific project they're pushing us to find faculty to help out with. So it kind of depends. We have other folks, for example, Picatinny Arsenal and the Department of Defense are looking for just workers. So helping us upskill workers for advanced manufacturing, and all sorts of different programs they need help finding talent for. So we're trying to help out with that as well.
So JP Morgan, I don't know if you saw this, they had a great piece out that said that some of its corporate customers are slashing manual work by almost 90% with its cash flow management tool that runs on AI. Right. And that's the fear, right? That we're going to use AI and replace all the workers, and those workers don't have any jobs. Is there any truth to that?
It's a great question. So whenever you have technologies, they are disruptive. There are going to be jobs, certainly, that are going to go away. But if you look back to when Excel first came out or when computers first came out, you look at accounting as a great use case. Accountants didn't go away because we were going from a ledger that was literally on paper to a computer-based system. We found new questions to answer, new ways that we could look at our accounting and finances. So I think the jobs are going to change, but the overall number of jobs, net, I don't know if it will actually reduce. It might increase in some cases, but we're going to answer different questions. We're going to do things much more quickly than we did in the past, for sure.
I guess my lack of knowledge or full appreciation of AI is I'm just not sure if it's something completely new, or is it just the next iteration of what the smart people at NJIT typically do? I'm just not sure what's new about it other than, man, everybody's talking about it. And it was a theme for why one of the themes that drove the stock market in 2023 was a concept of AI, and the average trader across the river in New York has no idea what AI is, but he's buying stocks because he thinks they're an AI play.
It's been around for decades, right? But we have a couple technologies that came out in the last 2 years that have really transformed the way we see AI and why we're talking about it. We were talking about it last night at my family's Sunday dinner. And the reason is because now it's accessible. So for example, 2 years ago, if I go into Google and I type, how do I make chicken parm? I get all these ads, I get all these things that tell me about chicken parm. I go into ChatGPT and I type that, for example, and I get a perfect recipe on how to actually make that. So it becomes very accessible to anyone. And I think that go-to-market strategy that OpenAI had of making accessible is what really changed the game. And also at the same time, computing power is exponentially increasing. It's more accessible. We're now able to use it everywhere from making chicken parm to try and do research.
So what kind of cool stuff are you guys working on right now? Like, what are you most excited about?
For us as NGI, what we're very focused on is trying to get things out of the university into the real world. And one specific project that we're working on is actually on law enforcement and body cams. So body cams they're a sensor that generates a huge amount of data. And from those data sets, we're usually looking at them after the fact. So after something bad happens, we're trying to review that situation. What we're trying to do is, can we look at that data and predict something bad is going to happen before it happens? So if we see a pattern between some behavior,
wait, backtrack for a second. So you have so you're tracking behavior to then model behavior later?
Yeah, so for example, let's say we see an officer is running more frequently, they're yelling more frequently. That is probably correlated to some behavior outcome, such as excessive use of force. So for example, we might identify this officer is at a much higher likelihood of excessive use of force in the future. Let's intervene and get them training before something bad happens. So we're trying to build that as software we can actually put onto hardware and help with law enforcement and help with de-escalating situations.
Wow, that's really cool. What other stuff? Like, what other thing are you excited about?
Oh man, there's so many.
Pick your second best.
My second best would definitely be in the drone space. So drones are another sensor. We're collecting huge amounts of imagery data. And today, a lot of that work is actually a person looking at video, scrolling through video like you would from a VHS tape. And we're using computer vision and AI to actually analyze that data and try to predict what's happening, try to classify certain imagery and answer very specific questions, like is a power line going to fail based upon a single picture from a simple drone?
Oh, now that could be really helpful, especially all the wildfires and stuff that we've had. And then as all the utilities are kind of grappling with like old infrastructure that is not easy to replace, kind of how you manage that. Is it expensive for these companies to use this?
Usually the bottleneck today is data generation and data annotation, because there's lots of data, but we have to annotate the data to be actually able to use it. So for example, with the body cams, we have to know what those events are that we're trying to predict and actually classifying them ahead of time. So that's the bottleneck for it in a lot of cases.
All right, Michael, thanks so much. It was really great. This is really fun. Get your perspective. Is your son going to stay, or is he going to?
He's going to listen all day, yeah.
He's going to be all awesome. We like that. Future generation, Michael Johnson, president of New Jersey Innovation Institute, NJII. Thanks very much. It was really great to get that perspective. That's really interesting. I think the body cam situation, too, like, it's not a profiling thing. It's like you're going to get the help that you need down the road, which I think is really cool. And it's good to hear these actual use cases, because it's easy to just say AI is cool, it's going to do stuff, but to get an actual use case that you can do is quite interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Just looking at the market here real quick, futures off about 0.1% on the S&P. The Nasdaq's off about 0.2%, so nothing major there.
Nothing major. It's all about Powell.
Yield slightly higher, 4.5 basis points on your 10-year. 10-year is now trading 4.22%.
All right, let's go to Michael Barr with world and national news. Michael.
Thank you very much, Alex, Paul, John, and we have breaking news all over the place. Now, the Supreme Court has ruled that former President Donald Trump can appear on the ballot in Colorado. The vote was unanimous among the justices. The Colorado ruling centers on Trump's role in the January 6th attack on the Capitol. It comes as voters in 15 states are getting ready to head to the polls tomorrow for Super Tuesday primaries. More breaking news. Alan Weisselberg, the former Trump Organization financial chief, just pleaded guilty to lying during a trial. Weisselberg, a longtime lieutenant to former President Donald Trump, reached an agreement with Manhattan prosecutors. Weisselberg conceded he lied on the witness stand in Trump's recent civil fraud trial. However, he is not expected to implicate his former boss. Vice President Kamala Harris says there must be an immediate ceasefire in the Israeli-Hamas war. Harris addressed what she called the ongoing humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza yesterday, confirming the U.S. has begun its airdrops into Gaza, and they're looking into a possible new route by sea to bring in aid.
People in Gaza are starving. The conditions are inhumane, and our common humanity compels us to act.
Vice President Harris spoke just before delivering remarks commemorating the Bloody Sunday attack on civil rights leaders in Selma, Alabama. After 2 days of bad weather, the third time's the charm.
3, 2, 1, ignition, engines full power, and liftoff.
NASA's Crew 8 mission
Go
lifted
Falcon,
off
go
on a SpaceX
go
rocket from the
NASA.
Kennedy Space Center in Florida last night. The crew of 3 Americans and a Russian is now en route to the International Space Station to replace Crew 7, who have been up there for 198 days. Coming up, Bloomberg Surveillance will continue with John, Alex, and Paul. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Right now, stocks are lower, yields are higher. In the S&P 500, Paramount Global and Warner Brothers Discovery, they are the worst performing stocks right now. Paramount Global down 5.6%. Warner Brothers Discovery, that is lower by 5.1%. Best performing stock in the index, let's go there. That belongs to Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. That's up just about 6.7%. Also, you have shares of NVIDIA. They continue to power higher today. Shares of NVIDIA right now, they are up 3.75%. The policy reacted 2-year yield, that is up 5 basis points right now. 6 basis points, we'll call it, at 4.59, just shy of 5%. At Bank of New York Mellon, strategist Jeff Yu sees Fed rate cuts in the first half of this year.
Central banks right now, they need to retain optionality. They will not pre-commit to cuts, but they'll absolutely not pre-commit to say there won't be any cuts either this year. They will be data dependent, and right now we think data will continue to justify easing in Q2.
Right now the S&P 500 just 1 point lower at 5,135. The Dow Jones Industrial Average 84 points lower. That is down 0.2%. And the NASDAQ 100 11 points lower. That's down just under 0.1%. And ahead on the economic calendar for this week, S&P Global Services, the PMI, the factory orders, ISM Services, ADP, employment, JOLTS, and the jobs report all this week. We check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Now back to NJIT, Alex and Paul.
All right, Paul, thank you. No, I'm Alex. That's Paul. You're John. It gets hard when you're not physically there for me to see you. It gets confusing. That's right. Paul and I are here broadcasting live from the campus of the New Jersey Institute of Technology, NJIT, where we're talking about all things AI and sort of how you create the thing and then move it outside and bring it to companies or businesses that need it, and sort of bridging that gap between those two. And one person in part very much responsible for that here in New Jersey is Beth Simone Novak. She is Chief AI Strategist of the state of New Jersey. What a cool title, Beth. What does that mean?
First in the country.
What does it mean? So, I mean, are you like, hey, business, you should use that? Or, hey, government, let's use this?
All of the above.
Okay.
So Governor Murphy has said very loud and clear, we have to do better when it comes to technology in terms of embracing the use of technology to grow the economy, to grow jobs in the state, but also to improve how government works. So my job is to work on all of the above and to see what we can do as government to make that easier, to make that better, and to embrace the responsible and ethical use of AI to ensure that we're doing right by our residents.
So what are some of the applications that, you know, the governor and the governor's office thinks AI can do over the next several years? Where will the residents of New Jersey see it, do you think?
So this is not a several years from now. The future is already here, and we've been using AI for quite some time, and generative AI since the very beginning. So in many ways that you don't even see or know about. So for example, if you're getting a letter from the state of New Jersey about, let's say, your unemployment benefits, you're getting a letter that has been simplified, that has been written in plain English, that's been written, we hope, more clearly than it would have been before, because generative AI can help us to do a first draft. If you're calling up about your anchor tax relief that the state of New Jersey is giving out to residents, you are hopefully getting your call resolved faster because you get a menu option that's we've written with the help of AI, because voice to text, our call center operators know people are calling in asking the following kinds of questions. We should write these menu options and these instructions and answers so people can get that information faster. When you're going out, for example, and typing in on a website and telling us comments of how we can do something better on a website like business.nj.gov, where you can go to start and run and grow your business, everything you need from one place. We're taking the comments we're getting from citizens about what they need, about what they want, using AI to help us summarize those comments, synthesize them, and turn that into the information that people want and need front and center. So the goal is government that's more responsive, more informative, and providing services 24/7 that are responsive to what people actually want and need.
That's a pretty good pitch. You were also the Chief of Innovation, right, in New Jersey?
I was for many years the Chief Innovation Officer, yes.
So did the chief innovation officer become the AI strategist, or is there also an innovation officer? And I guess I'm trying to understand, like, is the innovation thing now AI, or can there be other stuff?
There is still other stuff. We have a wonderful new chief innovation officer. Dave Cole has taken over that title and is leading our efforts to use technology to improve how we bring services to residents. So projects like business.nj.gov, to take the business one, for example, or other digitization of resident services, so that instead of having to go to a government office, between 9 and 5, you can come to a website, you can use your mobile phone.
Oh my gosh, that would be amazing.
Transact with government 24/7. That's work that's been underway for a long time, and that doesn't just depend on AI. That is about, again, clearer instructions, plainer English, things available online, giving you the information front and center that you want and need in the way that people have become accustomed to from the best businesses. We think that government should serve citizens in much the same way, except in the public interest.
Well, New Jersey's had a long history of technological innovation. I think of telecommunications with Bell Core and Bell Labs supporting AT&T and Verizon. I think about some of the biotech and pharmaceutical companies like Johnson & Johnson based here in New Jersey. I'm wondering, is there support for the young NJIT grads that are in a garage somewhere in Jersey City coming up with the next AI type thing? How do we support those people?
Absolutely. So there are a whole number and range of investments that are out there to support people starting new businesses. That's what my colleagues at EDA work on in particular, is ensuring that we're providing those kinds of incentives for people who want to start their business in New Jersey and grow their business in New Jersey. That's particularly why the government is here, to help support those businesses going out, and in particular now to look at how we can support new AI businesses or existing businesses who are asking how we can turn around and use AI to improve what we do. It's a question we've been answering for a long time. Before we called it AI, we called it big data.
Yep.
Right? So the more that people were using, a lot of businesses have asked themselves, how can I go out and start using data to measure what's working, to measure what customers want, and again, to deliver new kinds of services across a range of industries. It's why we've been starting new partnerships, such as with Princeton, around this new AI hub that's been set up, so that we can connect some of that tremendous innovation that's coming out of universities like NJIT, like Rutgers, like Princeton. We're, of course, known in this state for having the best universities and the best education system in the country, and we want to connect that back to how we're growing the economy and growing jobs here in the state.
What's the hardest part of your job?
There's only 24 hours in a day, and there's a very, very lot to do, both on the public sector side and on the private sector side.
But do you feel like it's awareness? Is it implementation? Is it finding the cool technology? Is it having too many problems to solve?
Well, the cool technology is very much there, and I think what we're trying to do now is to ensure that, especially in government, we are building not just awareness, but actually use of these tools to improve how we serve residents across a whole range of domains and across agencies.
So we know that Governor Murphy feels that AI is important, and the administration feels that AI is important. Does the rest of the government within the state share that as well, or does it require kind of a promotional pitch from the office?
Well, the governor is the salesman-in-chief for the state of New Jersey, and of course setting this message about the importance of AI, the ways we should be embracing these tools, going out early. We're one of the first states to actually put out a policy that says we should responsibly and ethically use AI to better serve residents. And one of the things we're doing is promoting upskilling and learning across the whole of public sector. It's not enough to have just the governor supporting AI, to have a chief AI strategist. We need every public servant out there to be asking themselves, how can I use these powerful new tools, again, ethically and responsibly, safeguarding privacy and security and people's data, but how can I go out and use these tools to write that better first draft of the email, to write that clearer website, to be able to write a better policy. This is the next generation, if you will, of word processor, to put it very simply, but that we should be using to be able to serve residents better, and we need everybody to know how to do that.
All right, Beth, thanks so much. We really appreciate your time. We know you're quite busy. Beth Simone Novak, Chief AI Strategist from the state of New Jersey. That was actually really helpful. Okay, so this is like the next version of the stuff that we do normally. Like that really helps me, because I think for people like you and me, it's hard to understand the practical applications. It just becomes like AI. Whatever that winds up meaning.
Yeah, exactly. So, are you looking at these markets here? Pretty much unched on the day for the S&P 500. The Nasdaq's off about a quarter of, about 1/10 of 1%. So not much movement on the index level. We're going to have more coming up. This is Bloomberg.
Your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
And I'm John Tucker, the Bloomberg Newsroom with the company news report. NVIDIA has claimed yet another milestone. It's overtaken Saudi Aramco in market value, so this makes the chip maker the world's third most valuable public company after Apple and Microsoft. The company ended Friday's session at $2.06 trillion, closing above the $2 trillion mark for the first time. And again, the shares are rallying today, so it's adding to those gains. The rally has been relentless this year. The stock has climbed about 66% and added some $834 billion in value up to Friday's close. NVIDIA shares have skyrocketed on the back of blowout earnings that reaffirm Wall Street's optimism of the potential for artificial intelligence that reshape the technology industry. Perrigo's Opill, the first ever over-the-counter oral birth control in the U.S., will hit the shelves of major retailers and pharmacies with a suggested monthly retail price of $19.99. U.S. regulators cleared Opill for non-prescription use last summer, joining more than 100 countries where the pill is available without barriers such as physician appointments, approval from doctors and parents. Still, insurers not mandated to cover the over-counter drug, so an affordable price tag is critical to its accessibility. And employees at an Amazon.com warehouse near Seattle recently got a glimpse of the future of work. A 5'9" robot that resembles a human, walks like a bird, and has glowing white eyes. Called Digit, the machine is configured for one basic task: plucking empty yellow bins off a shelf and ferrying them several feet to a conveyor belt. And that's your company news.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
You are listening to Bloomberg Intelligence. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. We are broadcasting live from the campus of New Jersey Institute of Technology, NJIT. We're talking all things AI, but more importantly, the practical applications of such things. We'll get to more of that in just a moment, but for now, I want to take you right to Michael Barr for world and national news. Michael?
Thank you very much, Alex, Paul, John. In a unanimous vote, the U.S. Supreme Court said Donald Trump can appear on the presidential ballots this year. It puts an end to efforts to ban him under a rarely used constitutional provision, barring insurrectionists from holding office. This morning's ruling overturned a Colorado Supreme Court decision that said Trump forfeited his right to run for president again by trying to overturn his 2020 election loss. The ruling comes before Super Tuesday. Vice President Kamala Harris is meeting today with an Israeli war cabinet member after she issued a sharp rebuke of the country due to the deteriorating humanitarian situation in Gaza. Harris called out Israel for not doing enough to ease the, quote, humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza.
No excuses. They must open new border crossings. They must not impose any unnecessary restrictions on the delivery of aid.
Vice President Harris made her comments just before delivering remarks commemorating the Bloody Sunday attack on civil rights leaders in Selma, Alabama. Former Trump Organization finance chief Alan Weisselberg has reached an agreement with Manhattan prosecutors and has pleaded guilty to perjury charges. Weisselberg conceded that he lied on the witness stand in Trump's recent civil fraud trial. Weisselberg, who was led into a lower Manhattan courtroom in handcuffs today, was also a defendant in the suit brought by New York Attorney General Letitia James. CVS and Walgreens, the two biggest pharmacy chains in the U.S., will start selling an abortion pill as soon as this week in certain stores in several states. Dr. Celine Gounder is the public health editor at the Kaiser Family Foundation.
This is a big deal. This is the first time that women will be able to get mifepristone, so medication abortions, through retail pharmacies. Still need a prescription. So this is not over the counter, to be very clear. You still need a prescription.
Dr. Gounder spoke on CBS Morning. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Paul, Alex, John.
All right, thank you so much, Michael Barr, joining us there. So we're talking about NVIDIA all morning, but let's get a little deeper here, Paul. This is really interesting. NVIDIA has now overtaken Saudi Aramco in market value, making the chip makers the world's third most valuable public company after Apple and Microsoft. How's that for a stat for you?
It's amazing. And I guess these smart people at NJIT are onto something. This whole AI thing.
Yeah.
This whole AI
But what I find interesting is this definitely shows an old to new economy situation. And I feel like it's something very similar with Supermicro as well as Whirlpool, right? Whirlpool coming out of an index, Supermicro going in. It's like you have the old world economy like a Saudi Aramco that produces oil in favor of a super cool chip maker NVIDIA who's doing AI. I feel like there is something that's it. That's what we're seeing.
NVIDIA shares have skyrocketed on the back of blowout earnings that reaffirmed Wall Street's optimism on the potential for artificial intelligence to reshape the technology industry. The company dominates the market for graphics chips, GPUs, I've been told, designed for complex computing tasks needed to power AI applications that companies are rushing to develop. The rally has been relentless this year. This is my favorite. The stock has climbed about 70% and it added $883 billion in value.
Wow.
As a Wall Street guy, that talks to me.
Yeah, well, yeah. And also there was a great article, I think it was in the Journal, about FOMO. And sort of people who had FOMO and they sold out of NVIDIA, say, 8 months ago, but they still made like a 27% profit, but yet they're not getting this kind of boost, and that FOMO winds up leading to FOMO. And David Kostin of Goldman Sachs has said that the Magnificent Seven gains are backed by fundamentals. The only exception is the multiple of sales at which these companies are trading is at an all-time high, but in every other area, they're not. And so it's actually backed by stuff versus, say, maybe in 2000 where the bubble was a bit different.
Yeah, we sold concepts then. We didn't even sell revenue. We sold,
ideas.
Ideas.
I can sell you an idea for $1 billion.
Here's a pet food market. Here's how much I think the internet's going to take the pet food market. Let's put a multiple on top of that revenue, and I can take that company public, which we did time and time again until it didn't work.
Right.
And stopped working. Then I had to find something else to do.
Now it's here with me.
Yeah, we're going to have more coming up. This is...
Okay, today I'm going to talk about how to succeed with a startup. Obviously, more than can be said here in 20 minutes, but I will do the best I can. The most important thing, the number one lesson we try to teach startups is that the degree to which you're successful approximates the degree to which you build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it. Startups always ask us for the secret to success. They always want to believe it's something other than this, because this is really hard to do. But this is it. If you can build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it, you have done 80% of the work that you need to be a really successful startup. If you think about the most successful companies you know, Google, Facebook, whatever, you probably found out about them because a friend of yours said, you got to try this, it's great. So this is the bar. Something that people love so much they tell their friends about it. One important indicator for a product like that is a product that's simple to explain and easy to understand. If you can't explain in a few words what you do, and if at least some people don't say, oh, that's pretty interesting, that's usually a mistake. It's usually a sign of unclear thinking or a need that is not big enough.
Record close for the S&P 500, the NASDAQ, and the NASDAQ 100. Right now, looking at the major averages, little change to lower at this point. Traders are waiting this week's batch of jobs data and remarks from Fed officials for clues on the interest rate outlook. Among the leading stocks in the S&P 500 right now, we have shares of NVIDIA. They are up right now, up 3.7%. And just some breaking news crossing the Bloomberg right now. Boeing has one new 737 MAX orders. This is part of an American Air deal. Among the leading stocks in the S&P 500, we mentioned NVIDIA. Right now, the S&P 500 is pairing some of the earlier losses down just 2 points, 51.34 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is 94 points lower. That's down about 0.25%. And the NASDAQ 100, 15 points lower. That's down just about 0.1%. Lori Calvasino over at RBC Capital Markets says, you know what, the Magnificent Seven stocks may have peaked, but that doesn't mean the rally is over.
The rest of the market still has a lot of room to run. And I think one of the things that's going to fuel rotation in the market away from those big stocks back to everything else is this idea that GDP expectations continue to improve, which should narrow the earnings advantage of those big names. I think they've done well for good reasons. Their time may be running out, but that doesn't mean they go down.
And Fed Chair Jerome Powell expected to double down on his message that there's no rush to cut interest rates. He's going to deliver semi-annual testimony to Congress.
Another thing that startups need to look for is a market that is either started to undergo or is soon going to undergo exponential growth. I think this is actually related to one of the biggest mistakes investors make when evaluating startups. Investors always say, well, what's your growth rate? We care about the growth rate. Investors will forgive smallish revenue today if it's growing quickly. For some reason, people don't think about markets this way. But if you think about the most important startups, they are the ones that I start in small markets that are growing very, very quickly. 11 years ago, the market for iPhone apps was $0. It's now huge. And I think if you only think about the TAM today, you'll make a big mistake. What you really want to do is identify a market that's going to grow every year and be able to ride that up elevator.
Coming up later this week, let's check in with Nora Melendez. She covers the equities. Bloomberg News. Nora, what are you looking at?
Well, let's take a look at Apple. This company was actually hit with the equivalent of a $2 billion penalty from the EU over an investigation into allegations that it shut out music streaming rivals. I know we'll be hearing a little bit more on this later here in this segment, but it's really interesting here, especially as you think about antitrust. And of course, we've got them really hammering here over in the EU about what that entails. But specifically, it's talking about music streaming rivals such as Spotify and saying that essentially Apple is cutting out the idea that a lot of these users can see other cheaper prices for different things depending on the app that it's coming from here, Paul.
But just to point that out too, is that the stock is down about almost 3%. And that's also, I think, in part because Goldman Sachs removed it from its list of top buys. It still has a buy rating on the stock, but basically the stock has just not performed well. And we broke below that 180 level, I think it was late last week. And so there was an argument that you'd see a lot of short sellers kind of come into the market if we breach that level. And it's really, it's an ugly chart there for Apple, Nora.
Yeah, not looking too great, Alex, and especially as we see right now, down to its lowest intraday level since November, down as much as 3.2%, pairing a bit here, but not great news to hear here.
All right, what else you got for us?
Let's take a look at, of course, at JetBlue and Spirit, which we've been talking about all morning. Just wanted to circle back on that. The company mutually agreed to terminate that $3.8 billion deal. And of course, this has really been in focus, especially with this being just more than a month since a federal judge said that it was blocking the deal on antitrust. But of course, a lot of those JetBlue shareholders are super excited because they weren't really excited about taking on Spirit's debt here. But the question is, what's next for Spirit?
I don't know. You tell me. I mean, nothing good.
Wish I had the answer.
The DDIS function for JetBlue, it shows you just kind of the corporate debt that's coming. They got a lot of debt coming due in the next coming years. That's something they're going to have to deal with. So that's probably going to be first on their agenda. And they could have used the balance sheet of JetBlue, but now they have to restructure, I guess. What else you got for us, Nora?
Lastly, looking at Paramount, those shares are down as much as 5.8%. That's the lowest intraday level since March of 2020. And I know, Paul, that you follow this space pretty closely, but basically its struggles are worsening, specifically in the TV space. Ads are in free fall, according to BI analysts, saying that the bigger issue is carriage renewals with Charter and Dish, which apparently both are tough negotiators. So that's not really what shareholders want to hear right now as we think about the TV space and it just still having some prominence here.
Yeah.
Trust me, these companies used to be really good businesses and pretty good stocks to own. I mean, back in the day, and it wasn't more than 5-6 years ago when 100 million U.S. households were paying $80 a month for 500 channels, whether you think that was worth it or not. In that scenario, everybody made money. Everybody. And then streaming came along and it just blew it all up.
So it's so interesting. So I've been doing this biz for like 17 years. On air in some capacity, and when I first got hired to do all of it, it's like, you know what, linear TV's going away. It's not going to happen. It's dead. Blah blah blah, and it didn't die.
No.
So you got to thinking, well, maybe it's not going to die. Maybe there is a lifespan for it, and now you're like, actually, no. Maybe this is the time. We're 17 years too late, but like this is actually happening.
And it took Netflix, and that was a catalyst. So. Than just the internet in general. So, but people are consuming media in different ways, and it's not that traditional bundle where the cable operator got paid, the cable network company got paid, everybody got paid. Now it's up to the consumers. More power in the consumer's hands.
Right.
But I bet you, people in this room, if you add up everything that's hitting your Visa bill, it's the same thing you were paying.
I was
Comcast
just about to say. I mean, how
many
many subscriptions do you all have?
Yep.
One, two, and then you do like the tiering, right? So we just did Paramount Plus without the ads. So that's more money. So if you add that all up, I don't know. I think it's probably the same, but you have to get all of them anyway, because where else can you get Netflix?
And
that's
one
the
of the
problem.
things the cable companies did for you is just convenience. You paid extra for convenience, and now you have to do it all yourself and deal with it all. So anyway, all right, Norma Linda, thanks so much for joining us. Norma Linda, she covers all the equities for us here. I'm looking up Apple here. The stock's down 2.7%. The European Union, who has always been tough on U.S. technology, I think 20, 25 years ago with Microsoft and this thing called Windows, and they're still beating up on U.S. tech companies. So another fine come along. Let's check in with Anurag Rana. He covers all things technology for Bloomberg Intelligence. So Anurag, put into context what happened to Apple here from a regulatory standpoint and what it means for them. Just explain kind of what the fine is for.
Yeah, this has been going on for a while, and I think the expectations were that they were going to be fined about 500 million euros. Now, the more important thing is on March 7, the Digital Markets Act goes live, and Apple's already made concessions in terms of all the things the European Union wants to do. I think the surprise to our analyst, Tamlin, who's based in Europe, was the size of it. It's not, when we rumored was 500, when it came to around 1.8 billion, one thing is for clear at this point, that Apple's not going to just, pay this fine and walk away with the DMA or the Digital Markets Act. It's possible that the App Store, policies are going to be under more scrutiny, and I think that's what's driving the stock down. I mean, $2 billion is not that big of a deal for Apple, but I think the $21 billion of revenue that the App Store generates, I think that's a bigger issue.
So here's my thing, though, is that the stock is down over 10% since its January high for this year. So clearly something else was going on, just not this fine. That's just adding fuel to the fire here. What is happening to Apple?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, all the bad things that can happen to Apple are happening all at once. I mean, frankly speaking, and right now, when you look at their iPhone sales, they are slowing down. China competition, a lot of supply chain dependency on China. On top of that, App Store stuff. They are not a player in Gen AI right now. So not a lot of good things happening for Apple, and it's going to be a slow year for them. It's probably going to be another slow year next year. So Apple has to come out in June when they do their developer conference and put some fresh, I would say, air or life into the company by saying that, okay, we do have a generative AI strategy, and this is how we are thinking of achieving it. I think other than that, it's going to be a difficult year for them.
I think this June conference that you referenced, Anurag, it's usually a conference maybe where they introduce a new cool product or something like that. But it feels like the pressure on the company this year is as great as I can ever remember it, because they're either going to come out with something really cool as it relates to AI, or they're just going to come out and say, no, we're not rushing into it, in which case the stock's going to presumably be challenged here. What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, the June conference is going to be a lot of the software updates, the Worldwide Developer Conference, and you do give, they are bound to give a lot more detail about what are the 5, 6, 7 things that they're going to be updating on their software that has more generative AI capabilities. I think it's not going to be that big, just because these things take time. We just heard from Mark Gurman, not that long ago, that they're shutting down the car and allocating that headcount to generative AI. But, what are you going to do in 3 months? I think it's going to be a little longer than that. They're going to make some promises. But frankly speaking, I mean, they do have a distribution network. Maybe we should give them some points at this point to see if they can pull this off. It's going to lead to an iPhone refresh cycle that we haven't seen before. But I think, I'm not betting on anything big at this point.
So go to the AI strategy. If you had to articulate what Apple's AI strategy is, what would you say?
Yeah. So let's think about all the different things that we do on a phone. So, for example, Siri by itself, could be far more sophisticated than what it is today. Imagine what all different things you can do with OpenAI or ChatGPT. Imagine if you could do that just on the phone itself without having to go to a third party and do it. Now, Apple has the wherewith in terms of dollars to do it, whether they actually have the capacity from a technology point of view. If they can embed a lot of those features, like you asking a question to your phone and you getting the answer right there, they have the distribution network of over 1 billion connected devices. Then what happens is you don't really need to go into an app to do a lot of that stuff. We also heard that they're going to develop a software that can write itself a little quicker. That's not going to help a consumer as much, that they're going to help more developers. But, the thing that we want to see is what can be done on the phone itself that would force me not to tap into an app, and I can get those answers immediately.
And that, to me, seems like something that Apple can absolutely do. If I were a long-term investor, should I be buying this stock here? I mean, I know they're going to get AI. And if they get AI, I'm going to get a monster bump in the multiple.
I am absolutely in the same camp with you, at this point, Paul. But frankly, they have to prove it. Right now, things haven't worked for them in terms of, the being on the edge of any technology at this point. So I think they have to prove it in order to get it. Remember, they have over 800 million phones that people have in their hand in terms of the cellular connection. So at any given year, they sell roughly about 220 million phones. If this thing really takes off, there are over 40% of phones that are iPhone 12 and below, or that is very low processing power, low memory. A lot of that gets upgraded, and that leads to a next big, cycle in iPhone. I think that can be done, but I think they'll have to prove it. Remember, for a company that grows at 2 to 5%, they're still trading at like 25 times earnings. So it's not cheap from even, that point of view.
But Anurag, I thought that Apple wanted to eventually become primarily services revenue. Like they didn't want to be dependent on hardware. They wanted to have people pay them stuff on like a monthly or yearly basis. How would that AI integration do that?
So the services revenue is an important piece, but it's nothing without the hardware. You have to have the hardware to get the
Right, but don't they
services.
want it to be? Don't they want it to be about that and not the hardware?
Yeah, but at the same time, if you are able to drive these higher value services, your ecosystem becomes stronger. People who have these older iPhones, let's say 4 years old, 5 years old, 6 years old, you're not going to be able to run those operations on it because it's going to be either too slow or your battery is going to die down very quickly. So you need to upgrade the hardware. Now, I just talked about iPhones, but you can extend that to iPads, to watches, to any other product that they have. It is the critical portion of it. Anybody who controls a large portion of these large language models will have an edge down the road. So they really want to be a player in that market. You don't want to be left behind.
So let's just go back to where we started here, which is some of the regulatory issues. Is this like 25 years ago when the EU came after Microsoft for Windows and bundling all that stuff, and they just kind of write some checks and you go away? Or is this something more of a challenge, more of a headwind for Apple, do you think?
I think it's more of a headline risk for the next several years. A lot of these things is not going to be just, they can't go out and tell them to reduce these fees. But having said that, there is going to be an overhang of the stock. But we think.
Welcome to the digital age. Are you struggling to stand out here? Don't worry. Meet Blue TV, who is your digital superhero.
Blue TV is a multi-purpose online media network that also provides digital marketing services. We are based in Islamabad, Pakistan. We are expert in creative marketing, social media and digital marketing, search engine optimization, web design, page rank, and SERPs, video editing, recording and production.
So, what are you waiting for? Pick up the phone and call or WhatsApp Blue TV on given number, or visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/blue.online.tv.
With Blue TV, your business growth will be skyrocketed.
It's a little spottier.
Okay.
It's interesting. It's an interesting little trade-off there. Anurag Rana joining us. Bloomberg Intelligence, a senior technology analyst. iPhone 11?
Yes.
Do things still work?
They work, but you're right. I'm getting a little bit. But I have CarPlay on my car, which is pretty cool.
So how does that work?
I don't know.
How can I listen to us on your car?
Oh, we just listen. I'm going to have a nice little explainer coming up in just moments.
Oh, okay, that's exciting.
Tom Keen's all fired up about CarPlay.
Even though he has no car.
Even though he has no car.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, exactly. So, but anyway, so we'll have that coming up. So we're in technology. We're in YouTube as well. So you can get us audio, video, pretty much anywhere you need us. That's where you find a Bloomberg. All right, we're going to have a little bit of a mixed tape here. We have lots of economic data, a lot more AI discussion coming up from the smart folks.
I'm from the UK and I'm the inventor of the gel razor. And today I'm looking for an angel investor to fund my project, the gel razor, whether that's a working concept and working prototype or manufacturing possibilities with investment or to get me a licensing deal secured. If you go in any supermarket today, you will see packets of razors sold separately with tins of mousse or gel. Hence I developed the all-in-one. The idea is you pressurise the handle, the gel flows through the reservoir up to the head of the razor, coating the blades, ready for shave. My target market is 18 plus, male or female, male blue version, female pink version. What I'm looking for in an investor is someone who's passionate, determined, shares my vision. That's an important step for me, and willing to succeed as I wanted to succeed myself. Patented in the UK in 2021 September with copyright protection. I have a logo for the gel razor, which you will see on my LinkedIn profile. Currently working with a company in the US who have done me a lovely sell sheet. Big up to them guys. So if you're interested, contact me on LinkedIn profile, Paul J. Gwilt, GWILT, or email me at mufc219@gmail.com.
16th winning week out of the last 18. S&P 500. Busy week also on the calendar. It's going to feature congressional testimony by Fed Chair Jerome Powell. The all-important jobs data, we're going to get that as well. Powell expected to say he's in no rush to cut interest rates after the latest data showed stubborn inflation. Among some of the individual shares on the move, JetBlue, Spirit, calling off their merger in face of regulatory opposition. Ark House Management and Brigade Capital Management boosting their offer for Macy's by 14% after the retailer rebuffed an earlier proposal. Shares of Macy's, one of the standouts today, 16% higher right now. S&P 500 down 5 points. That's a decline of 0.1%. We're at 5132 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average down 120 points. And the NASDAQ 100, 23 points lower. That is down about 0.1%. We have rising yields. The two-year yield up 6 basis points. Right now, that is at 4.59. The 10-year, 4 basis points higher, 4.22. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Back to the campus of NJIT in Newark, New Jersey. Alex and Paul.
All right, John Tucker, thank you so much. We miss you here, but I am learning a lot of cool stuff about AI, particularly the implementation. It's not just this thing that we talk about. Like, it can actually be used for certain areas. And apparently, it can also be used in sports. AI in the role of sports. So here to help us break that down and what that all means is Ivana Šerić. She is Zealous Analytics Senior Product Scientist, also a former basketball player, right?
Correct,
Former basketball player. You also know all the things about technology. How do you use AI in sports?
Yeah, so this field has expanded in last maybe 10 years a lot in other sports. So even before that, it was in baseball. That was one of the first sports. If you've seen Moneyball, that's really...
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I like me the Moneyball. Okay. And so it's basically like how to position, like what players to put where and what combinations. Is it that kind of stuff?
Correct. So player evaluation, in-game decisions, strategy, that sort of things, yeah.
So, again, played 4-year starter for NJIT's basketball. You also represented your native Croatia in youth basketball. So you're great at basketball, but you're also a math nerd to the nth degree. She got a BS and a PhD degree in applied mathematics from NJIT, focusing on computational fluid dynamics.
I don't know what that means.
I don't know what that means.
I'm not that smart.
But okay, I don't know.
She is.
So a great mathematician, great basketball player. Let's put it all together. What are some of the leagues? What are some of the really good applications for some of that technology? Because we've seen, you mentioned Moneyball for, that we've seen it in baseball. What other applications are out there that you think? Because it seems like we're in the very early innings of that.
Yeah. So early on, it started with just using basic data, so box scores, play-by-play, and then a lot of sports in recent years have what's called player tracking data, meaning we have locations of the players on the court or on a pitch, on a field, whichever sport we're talking about, at a high resolution. So from that data, we can extract not only things that are counted in a box score, but also other things that happen during the game that you wouldn't see counted in like a basic box score, for example.
What are some of the common questions that like coaches or owners come to you with?
The biggest question is, how do we value players? How do we find which players which teams should sign, how long of a contract, how much money should be on a contract. So that's one side. So that's the player evaluation side. And then the other side is coaching and in-game decision making. So which situations are producing the most value for the teams? Which situations are creating better opportunities to score?
I know, like in baseball, Major League Baseball, and in minor league baseball, now it's coming into all the other parts of baseball, the analytics people, the data people, versus maybe some of the more traditionalists, and they're they kind of butt heads on occasion. And how much analytics do you use? Imagine knows what I'm talking about. So how much analytics do you use versus just my gut, I think this player will do well? Or how do you kind of bridge that topic?
Yeah. So that's a big important thing, because you can just have data without domain expertise. And I think that's something that we at Zealous have a really good strength, is that we have the experts in data, in statistics, in AI, in machine learning, but we also have a lot of people who worked in sports teams and have that sort of experience and know which questions the teams want to answer, what's useful for them, and how can we help them best.
So yeah, because when you were saying what AI could help you do, it feels like, isn't that what a coach is supposed to do? But you're saying that you need someone to interpret how to manage that and stuff.
Right. So you need like a bridge between the data and what's happening on the court.
All right, if I'm an agent representing a player, now I got to learn this stuff, because the team's going to come at me and say,
this is what the program tells me that I need to pay
your
my
client's
client.
worth blank because his or her OPS is this and blah, 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 blah. And you got to come back and say, no, I think he's better than that, and I think he's worth more. So do you work with the agents and players themselves as well? Because they better be smart on this stuff.
Yeah, it's a great area where Zealous is growing as well in some of our sports. But yeah, it's not, an agent cannot learn all of this on their own. So having a company or a contractor who can.
So do you guys work with agents and players and directly?
In certain sports, yes.
Yeah.
But not all across the board. So you also, as Paul was mentioning earlier, you got your BS and your PhD in applied mathematics at NJIT. Woof.
That hurts just thinking about it.
Because we're here and we're talking about how NJIT kind of bridges the gap between learning stuff and then putting it out into the world, how did this help you evolve your career and leave you where you are today?
Yeah, even though I studied computational fluid dynamics, it's not exactly data science, but I've learned a lot of skills that
we would
help
not
the
know the difference,
transition.
by the way, so you can pretend it is the same.
There's a lot of skills that transfer from one field to the other. For example, coding, analyzing large data sets, creating visualizations, and communicating scientific results to regular audience, to anybody else who can understand it.
Are there some sports that are embracing AI or just technology analytics more than others?
I think that's historically been baseball, particularly because they had more advanced data for the longest time.
Yeah.
But other sports now also have the player tracking data and are starting to get more on that side.
How did you wind up in this? Because if you played basketball, right? Because you're originally from Croatia, right? Correct. So you played basketball, and then you somehow wound up deep into analytics. How did you do that?
Well, I always loved math, and I always loved basketball, and this was a perfect combination of the two.
So I'm kind of wondering, where are we, do you think, in terms of the evolution of applying data and AI to sports? Because the statistics, I've been following sports my entire life, and I'm listening to a broadcast, and they're saying stuff I have no idea what they're talking about. Like now batting average isn't important anymore to baseball, and now it's on base plus slugging. I don't know. I mean, it seems like we need a tutorial on a lot of these broadcasts. I mean, where can this go, do you think?
Yeah, I wouldn't know about baseball because I don't really understand the rules coming from Croatia. But in basketball, we for now we have the player location data, but it's also growing towards player kinematics data, which NBA has available
What
starting
kind of
this
data?
season. Kinematics.
And what's kinematics?
So the locations of players, wrist, elbow, shoulder, all of the joints. So more detailed data of like player movements and so how players are shooting, and you can extract all this more detailed information. And that's the next step in basketball.
Wow. Part of me thinks that's cool and also creepy, like all at the same time. Any sports where this like doesn't at all work for? I mean, this feels like this makes sense in like team sports. What about like more individual sports like gymnastics, skiing? Like how does it work in those kind of things?
Yeah, so Zealous actually works in golf, which is obviously an individual sport, and there we work directly with the players.
And what kind of data do you look at there for the golfer? I mean, to me, it's just, can I keep it on the fairway?
Can you line it up and shoot it into the hole? Yeah. What can you tell me about my non-game golf?
I actually don't play golf and don't completely understand it. So
fair enough, but the same idea that they can tell you like your
and
form, like how you stand, like that kind of thing. Like what kind of tools to
like
use?
where you hit it, where the ball, I guess it's called, falls when
and
you,
club head speed, and they're breaking it down.
Club head speed, you know stuff.
Oh yeah, they got it all now with the TrackMan. Everybody's got the little computer sitting right behind them on the driving range, and it measures basically everything. So now it's all about spin rate, club head speed, all this kind of stuff. But for those of us who are just trying to hit it on the grass and not the water or like the desert.
Because the water's bad.
It's not very helpful. Yeah, it's not very helpful.
Okay, so just like go that way. All right. Ivana, thanks a lot. Ivana Sherrick, Zealous Analytics. Really appreciate it. That's like an amazing story. I've never gotten into golf, though.
Why not?
It's boring?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, is it? Is it boring if you play it? It's boring to watch it.
No, people are passionate about it. I had, like, my kids were young, you put golf on, it's nice and serene. It's
called nap time?
It keeps them, yeah, exactly. It keeps them safe. That was my strategy with when they were young. So,
it's actually brilliant.
Yeah.
Why didn't I think of that?
Yeah, so anyway, we got some good golf start. Yeah, analytics in sports, it's everywhere. It's getting bigger, and teams are investing more in it. So it's just the future. All right, with our news, where are we going for our news here?
Michael Barr.
Let's go to Michael Barr, New York. Okay, that's good.
Thank you very much, Paul, Alex, and John. The U.S. Supreme Court said Donald Trump can appear on presidential ballots this year, unanimously putting an end to efforts to ban him under a rarely used constitutional provision, barring insurrectionists from holding office. More with Bloomberg's Jordan Fabian.
The Supreme Court ruled that the clause of the Constitution in question, which is Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which says that officers of the U.S. who engage in insurrection cannot run for office, the court ruled that only Congress can enforce that clause on federal candidates.
Bloomberg's Jordan Fabian. The former chief financial officer of the Trump Organization has pleaded guilty in New York to perjury in connection with the testimony he gave at the ex-president's civil fraud trial. Alan Weisselberg surrendered to the Manhattan prosecutor's office earlier today and entered the state court in handcuffs before pleading guilty to 5 counts of perjury. A week after it started, the largest wildfire in Texas history continues to rage across the state's panhandle. Dry, windy conditions are expected again this week, scorching about 1.1 million acres. The Smokehouse Creek fire is unprecedented in its size. Richard Murray of Canadian Texas.
We've had fires in the past, but they never were close to here. And to see this, I couldn't imagine.
Murray and 40 of his neighbors have lost their homes. Out west, the dig-out remains underway in towns and around the roads in the Sierra Nevadas after a monster storm left feet of snow in the region. However, for many residents like this man of Truckee, California, the dig-out seems nearly impossible.
Opening my back door right now. It's almost like a prison of snow.
Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom. This Bloomberg Business Flash. After Friday's record close for the S&P 500, the NASDAQ, and the NASDAQ 100, the rally taking something of a breather today. But then you have chipmaker NVIDIA adding more than 3%. It is one of the best performing stocks in the S&P 500. And it's also now the world's third most valuable company by market value, topping $2 trillion in market cap. Investors waiting to hear from Fed Chair Jerome Powell. He's delivering testimony to Congress Wednesday and Thursday. We're also going to get the jobs report this week. Meantime, Philip Colmar, the global strategist at MRB Partners, says the economy is humming along and a recession certainly out of the question.
So the soft landing was a mistake. We were into no landing. The data's uniformly come in that way, and stickier inflation. I think the Fed's actually making a mistake by looking to cut. We've been of the higher interest rates for longer in the United States.
But the S&P 500 right now 4 points lower, down just about 0.1% at 5132 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average 99 points lower. And right now, the NASDAQ 100, 34 points lower. That is down 0.2%. The earnings scorecard has 489 companies in the S&P 500 reporting earnings so far this season. Of those, earnings growth on average right around 8%. 76% of those companies have delivered positive earnings surprises. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Alex and Paul.
John Tucker, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney, we're live here today from the New Jersey Institute of Technology, NJIT, for the cool kids in Newark, New Jersey, talking about AI. And boy, there's a lot of smart people. We came to the right place for that, including our next guest, Anita Giovanni, Global Head of Innovation at Avanade. Avanade was founded by Microsoft and Accenture. Anita, thanks so much for joining us here. Could you talk to us about how you guys at Avanade approach AI? Where do you try to help out in the equation?
Yeah, so we are a global consultancy, as you mentioned, Microsoft Accenture joint venture, 60,000 employees around the world. And what we do is think about AI from a client perspective. How is it that we can support organizations across sectors be AI first? And at the same time, we're all going through this journey together. So thinking about ourselves as an organization, how can we be AI first in our own business processes and for our own people?
So I'm a company, and I come to you. Yeah. What do you do for me?
We think about a lot of things. Are you guys prepared from a people perspective, an organizational perspective, and a process perspective? For example, a lot of people that we interviewed in an AI readiness report said they were enthusiastic and optimistic about AI. That's great. However, half of the leaders said they weren't ready, and only a third of CEOs believe that their top leadership is AI fluent. So there's a dissonance between the excitement and enthusiasm and the reality of the preparedness of organizations. And what we do is make sure that organizations have the coaching and support they need to get there.
I would think one of the challenges, just speaking for myself, is I learned a whole lot today speaking to, again, the smart people from NJIT, kind of what AI is. I'm one of those people that says, if you can't explain it in one sentence, you don't understand it. And I don't think I understand it. What's the basic framework that you try to get across to your clients about what AI is and what it can mean for them?
Yeah, think about AI, and one of the biggest generative AI tools right now through Microsoft is Copilots. Think of it as a co-pilot, not necessarily a replacement pilot that can allow you.
That's a good way of articulating it.
Yeah, allow you to do your job more effectively and more efficiently. And so instead of thinking about AI as a job replacement, think about it as a way to replace key tasks and allow you to spend your days in ways that you want to, talking to people, being more relationship focused rather than necessarily summarizing emails or going through data sets, et cetera. So it's a partner.
So basically I could have some AI thing go through all my email and like collate the important parts and give it out, for example, and take it and give it to me so I don't have to spend my whole morning going through and reading reports.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's really cool.
Yeah, and so
that would save me so much time to go do other stuff.
Yeah, I mean, think about when you come back from vacation. You probably check your email when you're on vacation.
I
don't.
But for this exact reason, because if I come back, I have like 2,000 emails being gone for like a week, and I can't do it.
If you had the AI tool, what you could do after being away for 2 weeks, I don't check check my email and probably get in trouble for that, but I don't. I can come back and say, what did I miss over the last 2 weeks? Go through all my pings on Teams, go through all my Outlook, and can you prepare for me a summary so that now that I come back, I can actually be ready and can prioritize. That's where it really comes into
wow, that's really cool.
Yeah. So when you sit down with your clients, I mean, what's some of the common requests you get from them, or what do they ask for most of the help with, I guess?
Yeah, one of the things that's really top of mind for people is about skill set and training and capability building. So in our survey, we found that 8 out of 10 people said that 20 hours of their work week, almost 50% of their work week, can be replaced with AI tools. The challenge is they don't know how to use the tools in the most effective and efficient way. So the training around that is critical in the process. The other is a responsible AI governance set, right? What are the guardrails that we have to put into place so that people can play creatively in the space?
Do you feel like people and CEOs or board levels, do they now know what they don't know?
They are beginning to figure it out.
Or we're still in the beginning part of that?
I believe we're in the infancy of it. I think there's an infancy of the learning curve, but also an infancy of having the right people in the room, having diverse perspectives as we think about responsible AI.
And we're hearing you mention the ethical use of AI. I don't know how that's going to evolve. Is that going to be some partnership between public, private, the individual?
I'm not sure I actually know what that means.
Boy, it just seems like
ethical use of AI.
Yeah, it just seems like the technology could get out of control.
Look, as AI and generative AI becomes more ubiquitous, with increased scale comes increased risk. That's just the reality of things. So how do you mitigate those risks? I think one of the most important ways to do that is to have the right people in the room. So whether that's from a diversity perspective of gender, whether that's having people of color in the room, people from diverse backgrounds, it's one of the reasons that we do the scholarship program for women in STEM at this very institute, because we want to make sure that they're not brought in as a second thought, but rather at the very beginning of the conversation.
So what's like an unethical use of AI? Like where does AI get bad?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, you can use AI to create images that don't actually exist. You can put voices on people to say things through their own voice when they maybe have not said that video. You can think about putting in questions into generative AI that perhaps share data with the broader public that you didn't want to share. That's company-specific data. So there's a security component. There's a falsification component. There's lots of different ways you kind of have to be proactive about.
And on this front, once again, maybe at no fault of their own, the government is generations behind where the technology is. I don't know how this plays out. I really don't. I mean, is there a feeling that the industry for a while is going to have to police itself? Or is there going to be some, again, public-private partnership in terms of regulating this? Because this is not the FCC regulating the airwaves. This is really, really difficult.
Yeah, it gets complicated. Look, I think there's an individual level to it, an individual level of responsibility, but at the end of the day, it's going to fall on the leaders of organizations across the board. If the senior leaders are not thinking about responsible AI, they're not thinking about the AI fluency, no one else is going to think about that. So the responsibility on the leaders is very high.
How do they get fluent, aside from talking to you?
Yeah, well, there's defining AI, understanding and feeling comfortable with the language of AI, and then there's some very tactical things like prompt engineering. When you put in a question into Gen AI and get a response, there are ways you can position that question in a more intelligent way to get a response that more aligns with your needs. So there's very tactical things you can do to become more AI fluent.
I wonder what the technology, do we know what the technology investments can be required to be proficient in AI? Because I feel like there's going to be a lot of companies, a lot of people left behind. It's not just having the ability to have a laptop on your desk. It feels like it's a lot more than that.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this very briefly, but data is going to be critical. Data and AI are interlinked, so without strong data sources, the AI won't be as powerful as it has the potential to be. And so a lot of the technology investment right now, besides the people investment in training, is going to be on cleaning up and making sure that we have good, strong data to work off of.
So interesting, Anita. Thank you so much. Really appreciate
Absolutely.
it. Anita Javandi. Did I say that right? No, I said
Avanade.
Avanade.
We'll get it eventually.
Okay, all right. We're going to get it. That will be Paul and our quest is to get that correctly. But, I have to say, I feel like I learned a lot. I have a little bit of an understanding as to okay, now this is how people like you and I can understand it a little bit, which is very cool.
Right. But who gets a PhD in like applied mathematics?
Not
What's that all
us. Or what was it? Fluid math? I don't
Yeah.
know. Something like that. This is Bloomberg.
Your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
And I'm John Tucker in the newsroom with a look at some of the company news that we're following. American Airlines has agreed to buy 260 short-haul aircraft. This includes a massive deal for Boeing 737 MAX jets. This is a key endorsement of the plane maker as Boeing tries to work through a crisis of confidence following that near catastrophic accident back in January. Shares of Boeing right now, they're up 0.6%. JetBlue Airways formally abandoning its pursuit of Spirit Airlines. This comes more than a month after a federal judge blocked the $3.8 billion acquisition on antitrust grounds. JetBlue says the carriers reached an agreement to walk away after determining the terms of the pact, including receiving necessary legal and regulatory approvals, were unlikely to be met by dates specified in the deal. The company is going to pay Spirit $69 million. And Frank Slootman, who just stepped down as the Snowflake Chief Executive Officer, isn't a name that springs to mind as one of the tech industry's most important CEOs. Well, Slootman has parlayed his time at top 3 companies into a net worth higher than tech leaders like Apple's Tim Cook or Microsoft's Satya Nadella. As Slootman leaves his CEO post at the software company, he has a fortune of about $3.7 billion. He did it by leading Snowflake and ServiceNow through initial public offerings and was head of data storage firm Data Domain when it was taken over by EMC back in 2009. And the crafts retailer Joann, considering a bankruptcy filing, could come as soon as this week. It's part of a deal that would hand control of the company to lenders while allowing it to shed some of its expensive debt. And that is a look at some of your company news today. I'm John Tucker.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Good, happy Monday morning. I'm Alex Steele with Paul Sweeney. We are broadcasting live from the campus of New Jersey Institute of Technology, NJIT. Great stuff all throughout the last couple hours. We do want to get you updated now with Michael Barr with world and national news. Michael.
Thank you very much, Alex. Paul, John, the U.S. Supreme Court says Donald Trump can appear on presidential ballots this year. Bloomberg's June Grasso with more on the decision.
After hearing the oral arguments, anyone thought anything but that the Supreme Court was going to allow Donald Trump to be on the ballot this year. All the justices across the ideological lines found a lot of problems with having a single state make a determination not only for its citizens but also for the rest of the country. So that was the idea. You didn't want different states to do different things.
The unanimous decision put an end to efforts to ban him under a rarely used constitutional provision, barring insurrectionists from holding office. Today's ruling overturned a Colorado Supreme Court decision that said Trump forfeited his right to run for president again by trying to overturn his 2020 election loss. Alan Weisselberg, the former chief financial officer of the Trump Organization, pleaded guilty in New York City to 5 counts of perjury in connection with the testimony he gave at the former president's civil fraud trial. Weisselberg was led into the New York courtroom in handcuffs after surrendering to authorities this morning. Prosecutors are recommending a 5-month prison sentence. John Kerry is stepping down as U.S. climate envoy this week. Kerry, who is 80, scored a major victory at the UN conference in Dubai last December, when nearly 200 nations agreed to transition away from fossil fuels and accelerate action this decade. History made on the basketball court. Iowa's Caitlin Clark dethroned Pistol Pete Maravich to become the top scorer in college basketball history, men's or women's, shattering Maravich's 1970 record of 3,667 points. Clark spoke to ESPN's Holly Rowe.
I feel like I'm living in a dream, honestly, Holly, and hopefully I can inspire a lot of young girls to be able to dream to be on stages like this.
Caitlin Clark and the Hawkeyes beat Ohio State 93-83. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Paul, Alex, John?
All right, Michael Barr, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney, live here at the New Jersey Institute of Technology, NJIT. We've been talking a lot about AI today. JP Morgan's out with some interesting stuff. JP Morgan helped some of its corporate customers, Alex, slash manual work by almost 90% with its cash flow management tool that runs on artificial intelligence, bringing the largest U.S. bank one step closer to charging for this service. So the tool, which allows corporate treasurers to analyze and forecast cash flows, has seen tremendous interest from its clients who currently use it for free, the bank said. The bank is considering charging its customers in the future to use the solution dubbed Cash Flow Intelligence.
So apparently they have about 2,500 clients that deal with the wholesale payment unit, and that JP Morgan set a target about $1 billion in business value generated from AI in 2023, and this is going to wind up helping it. And eventually it could help employers shrink the workload week to just 3.5 days. But I feel like what we're hearing now, Paul, is not that all of a sudden you just have someone work 3 days, but that you can go do other stuff that might be more important than just crunching numbers or looking at data.
More productive. I mean, it's just, JP Morgan set a target of $1 billion in business value, quote unquote, generated by AI in 2023, and the firm increased that goal to $1.5 billion at its investor day in May. So again, that kind of goes to the question of productivity. To what extent can AI and the implementation of AI and basic workflow every day help companies be more productive?
I gotta say, the idea that someone could synthesize my emails and give me bullet points of what I missed, like over the weekend or vacation, that would be very appealing to me.
And I think it's going to be the smart people at this school and others, the New Jersey Institute of Technology, the math people. It's not going to be us. It's not going to be
But we'll use it.
We'll use it.
Yeah.
We'll be very happy to use it. So, again, had a good day here at NJIT. Lots of smart people. Lots of math, though. But anyway, they're figuring it out. They're on top of it. Balance of Power with Joe Matthew. That starts right now.
world of politics to the world of business. This is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
Donald Trump stays on the ballot and Congress comes up with a plan. Welcome to the fastest show in politics as the Supreme Court rules this morning on Donald Trump's eligibility under the 14th Amendment. He's going back on the ballot in those states that tried to take him off on this day before Super Tuesday. And after 3 more Trump primary wins, we'll have numbers for you and details on the court from Bloomberg's Greg Stohr. We'll talk to Republican strategist David Kochel. And we'll have analysis from our signature panel. Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us. There's more, you know, the House and Senate rolling out a 1,000-page bill to fund parts of the government. How about that? Jack Fitzpatrick from Bloomberg Government will join with details. Because there are no slow days anymore. Just ask Charlie Pellet. He starts us off, as always, with a look at Wall Street in New York right now. Hey, Charlie.
Well, hello there, Joe Matthew. Indeed, not a slow day at all. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all declining right now. Friday, of course, we had the 15th record this year on the S&P. Today, a retreat, lower little change, down 4 points right now on the S&P 500 index at 5133, down by about 0.1%. We've got the Dow Jones Industrial Average trading lower as well, down 86, down 0.2%, 39,001 right now. We have got the NASDAQ Composite Index down 0.3%, lower by 41 points. The relentless rally in stocks taking a breather today as traders await this week's batch of jobs data and remarks from Federal Reserve officials for clues about the path of interest rates. 10-year right now, 4.21%. The 2-year, 4.59%. Spot gold up 1.7%, 21.18 the ounce, while West Texas Intermediate crude is down 1.1%, 79.11 right now for a barrel of WTI. Bottom line, the S&P trading near records. Daryl Cronk is...
Welcome to the digital age. Are you struggling to stand out here? Don't worry. Meet Blue TV, who is your digital superhero.
Blue TV is a multi-purpose online media network that also provides digital marketing services. We are based in Islamabad, Pakistan. We are expert in creative marketing, social media and digital marketing, search engine optimization, web design, page rank, and SERPs, video editing, recording and production.
So, what are you waiting for? Pick up the phone and call or WhatsApp Blue TV on given number, or visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/blue.online.tv.
With Blue TV, your business growth will be skyrocketed.
Charlie, we thank you. Welcome to the Monday edition of Balance of Power, the fastest show in politics here on Bloomberg Radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube. We invite you always to join us on YouTube. Search Bloomberg Global News, the magic 3 words. You'll find our live stream there, not just this show, but those coming out of New York before and after it. A really cool lineup if you're following the markets or politics, as the program today is brought to us by the 14th Amendment. We had a lot to talk about already, but I say that all the time now. There are no slow days. Congress out with a deal last night, actual text on a spending plan that avoids a shutdown, at least for another week. We had 3 more primaries over the weekend. We're gearing up for Super Tuesday tomorrow and, of course, the State of the Union Thursday. But no, we have to talk to Greg Stohr first because the Supreme Court rules. And we got a heads up on this late last night that there'd be a ruling at 10 o'clock this morning, and here we are, 14th Amendment. Donald Trump can appear on presidential ballots this year. This brings us back to the case in Colorado, and Greg Stohr, by God, is with us at the table right now, having written the story, filed it on the terminal, and here you are. It's great to see you, Greg. Thank you for this.
My
on
pleasure.
What is a strangely busy day out of nowhere. How rare is that to get a heads up the night before something like this?
Well, very rare to get a heads up over the weekend that something is coming. And
Yeah.
this is a ruling that, normally when they issue rulings, they take the bench. They weren't scheduled to take the bench today, and they weren't there. We just got the paper copy down in the press room.
Okay, so checking a box here. This is one we've been waiting for. I mentioned the Colorado case, but there were some other states who had taken him off the ballot on these grounds. Does this Nullify them all?
Yeah, this essentially nullifies them all. There'll be some formalities to go through, but this issue is essentially over with. Donald Trump will be able to appear on presidential ballots across the country.
Fascinating. The grounds here were interesting because this had to do with being an insurrectionist, essentially, and it brought us back to January 6th. Those who argued against it said that it was written a bit more narrowly than that. What did we learn about that underlying argument?
Well, we learned that the court as a whole thinks that that provision of the Constitution can't be enforced unless Congress passes legislation to say, here's what we're going to do to decide whether somebody is indeed an insurrectionist.
Okay.
And that means that a state can't on its own say, we've concluded under our processes that he is an insurrectionist and is therefore ineligible. It's going to have to be up to Congress, and for the purposes of Donald Trump, that means he'll be on the ballot.
So it comes down to the definition then of an insurrectionist. Many folks were pointing back to the Civil War, which spawned this to begin with, right?
Yeah, and really, like, who decides and how it is decided that somebody is an insurrectionist. So the court didn't get into those questions about whether Donald Trump incited the Capitol riot, whether he was culpable for what happened that day. This was all about the process for deciding whether he is culpable that day. And what they said was, Congress has to lay down the rules for the process, and so far Congress hasn't done that.
This was originally, the spirit of this was originally written to keep Confederates from running for office. Is that right?
Yeah, or at least from holding office. That was kind of one of the issues in this case, about whether we are talking about somebody running for office, which is the way Colorado thought about it, or holding office, which would mean that up until January 20th, when the next president will take the oath of office, then there hasn't been a violation.
Boy, all right. Now, we're still waiting for a ruling on presidential immunity. That is separate. Everyone should be reminded this is with regard to Jack Smith's case that has now been taken off the calendar here. Do we have any reason to believe, having heard this today, that we might get a ruling on that soon?
Well, we're not going to have arguments in that until, we don't even have an argument date yet, but it will be the week of April the 21st. So probably we're many months down the road. Now, they moved pretty quickly in this case. And one of the interesting things about this and the timing is, of course, it's right before Super Tuesday, and Super Tuesday is the day that the vote happens in Colorado. So it seems pretty clear that they rushed to get this out before Colorado voters go to the polls tomorrow. There's not that sort of clear deadline in the immunity case. Jack Smith wants to get the Supreme Court to rule quickly because that's the only way there's a significant chance that there will be a trial this year before the election. So it's hard to say just how quickly after that argument in late April the Supreme Court will rule.
Even when the Supreme Court is acting in an expedited fashion, it still feels slow, doesn't it? But that's your life day in and day out, Greg Stewart.
Yeah, well, I mean, one case that people have pointed to is back in Bush v. Gore in 2000. That was a case where the Supreme Court actually did all of this in the span of 3 days.
Incredible.
But again, there they had a very specific date they were shooting for.
Right, absolutely. Great to see you. Thank you so much for coming in. The best Supreme Court reporter in the country for you there, Mr. Storr, with us on Bloomberg to get things started off. That's the phone call you make when the news breaks like it did this morning. And great to hear from Greg. One of these days or months, we'll be talking about that immunity case as well as we burrow down the hole here on another primary weekend and ahead of Super Tuesday. Of course, great implications with this ruling, not that it came as a surprise, and that's where we start our conversation with David Kochel, who we last spoke with when we were in Iowa. I love this. Republican strategist. He's the owner of Red Wave Communications. David, it's good to see you as you kind of help us get back to the beginning here and remind us of where we've been and where we might be going. Before I start asking you about states and issues, David, I want to just ask you about this ruling quickly. It's a box we can check. You glad you got one thing you don't have to worry about now, the 14th Amendment?
Yeah, look, I mean, this was always going to turn out this way. There's no, first of all, nobody's never been convicted of insurrection or anything like that. And there just is no standing for these states to do this. And I think the Supreme Court got it right. You need to leave elections in the hands of the voters, not in lawfare or the courts. This is always going to turn out this way. And I'm glad it's resolved so we don't have to worry about it anymore going forward.
Yeah, well, there's one we can put to the side. Of course, there are several others that we're waiting for, as I mentioned. But we're coming off another primary weekend. I could ask you about the three states Donald Trump swept, but there's not a lot of new there. David, what's new is Nikki Haley got one. She won a primary. It's in the District of Columbia. I realize this is not exactly a big deal, but her campaign is saying now that she is the first ever woman to win a Republican primary contest. Does that deserve some credit?
Yeah, from that standpoint, it's historic and it's a big deal. But I think if there was any contest she wanted to win in the country, Washington, D.C. probably be the last one she wants to win, because as you saw, right. The Trump campaign immediately dubbed her Queen of the Swamp. It's just, it's just one of those things that's kind of going to go in the history books as a little bit of a footnote to all of this. We started this back in Iowa, if you remember, on your set that night. And I think a lot of people who wanted to see something different than a Trump-Biden rematch we're very hopeful that night that something could happen and kind of break through and change this race from the inevitability of these two candidates. And although Trump was under 50 in that race, we did get to a one-on-one race, a two-person race, which is what everybody always wanted. Things have not turned out very well for Nikki Haley, and it looks like he's going to sew this thing up pretty quickly here in the next week or two.
Well, yeah, what's your thought on this? We were heading into New Hampshire, to your point, coming out of Iowa, and there was still a sense of possibility here. We're going into Super Tuesday now, where it's going to become not mathematically impossible, but maybe psychologically impossible for Nikki Haley to keep going here. When you start looking at another 15 states and that many delegates added to the pile. David, is this her last stand?
I think so. Look, she gave it a heck of a try. And like I said, the theory of the case was if you get Donald Trump one-on-one, then you've got a chance. And, he had been consistently kind of polling in the 40s. He was in the 30s through the 2016 contest. But then once this national lead really consolidated around him, and you can go back to the Alvin Bragg indictment when Republicans really started to rally behind him, he's been in the 50s consistently in the national polls. These early state polls had some vulnerability because the voters are really paying closer attention. They're looking at all these other candidates. But at the end of the day, the Republican Party was kind of ready to foreclose this primary and move on to the general election with Biden. And it looks like that's what's going to happen now. I don't begrudge Nikki Haley for staying in. She's got a point to make, and she's making it. And as long as she's not mathematically out of this thing, there's no reason to get out. She's had enough money to stick around, which is usually why people get out of these races. But it does look like he won't be probably the mathematical nominee by tomorrow. But their campaign says they're pretty sure he's going to get there on March 12th. And it looks like that's going to happen.
Yeah, it does. That's a week from tomorrow. For those playing along on their home game. Nikki Haley says she may not abide by the pledge. I wonder, David, if that matters, the pledge to endorse whomever the eventual nominee would be. She was asked about this on Sunday morning and says, I think I'll make what decision I want to make, indicating that the RNC has changed, that it's a different organization than the one she made that pledge to. Ronna McDaniel's gone. Does that give her cover?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's all transactional anyway. Everybody made that pledge so that they get on the debate stage and have a shot, hopefully, at Donald Trump, which they never got. She rightfully turns the tables on that argument and says, well, is he going to make a pledge that if I were to be the nominee, he'd support me? Nobody believes that he would do that. So I don't think there are some people in MAGA world that are upset about this, and I'm sure it'll bring a lot of mean tweets her way, but she's not obligated to support this president if she doesn't want to. I mean, it's a free country, and by the way, he's treated her pretty poorly over her husband's military service. And I don't think, I think if you are sympathetic to Nikki Haley's argument at all, I don't think you're going to begrudge her from taking her time or withholding her endorsement altogether. Not that at this point he really needs it. He's going to get support of most Republicans. You've seen Congress and their leadership get behind him now increasingly, and I think there are very few people who are going to kind of hold out on that support.
Those of us who are watching on YouTube are seeing images of Ralph Norman. What's Ralph Norman going to do? Although I guess he's going to make a pretty quick pivot to Donald Trump. We're spending time with David Koshel, Republican strategist, looking ahead to Super Tuesday. Bring us to school, David. We've got about 15 states at hand tomorrow. What should we be looking at with what seems to be an evening of inevitability?
Yeah, look, I mean, the things you're looking at right now are signs of what the general election could hold. Republican primaries really don't always tell you what you need to know, and neither do Democratic primaries about the general election. But I think there's a weakness for Trump among suburban women, which has been the Nikki Haley message all along. And I think if you see in places where there's a higher college attendance, where there are, where he's not doing well with women, that could portend trouble for him in the general election. But beyond that, the support in the party has consolidated around him to a great extent. I think also we can just look at the numbers, the turnout numbers. There seems to be more enthusiasm in the Republican Party right now than there is in the Democratic Party. Now, they've had success in special elections recently. They're counting on things like, the Roe decision to motivate their voters. But certainly President Biden is not motivating Democratic voters. It's going to have to be based on issues. So we can look for where Trump has some of his kind of, historic weakness, which is suburban voters and college-educated voters. That might show us a little bit of a problem. The thing is, he's offset those concerns by growing his numbers among non-white working-class voters. Black and Hispanic working-class voters are increasingly moving towards Trump. Now, he may not win those voters, but he'll get a significantly better percentage of them than he did in 2016. So Trump is an interesting way of where he loses votes, he tends to find them elsewhere. And, the latest round of polls, New York Times Siena poll in particular, has real concern among Democrats for Biden and whether or not he's going to be able to pull this off because, his net favorability is terrible. His job approval is way down. Trump's favorability is actually higher than Joe Biden's right now, which is kind of funny. We haven't seen that until, the last couple of years here. And I think this is going to be a real nail biter of an election. It's going to come down to those, 5 or 6 states that it has the last few cycles. And, I don't know how much we'll learn about that tomorrow, but certainly you have a lot more enthusiasm for Trump on the Republican side than you do for Biden among Democrats. In fact, I think there is a lot of nail biting going on in the Democratic Party right now.
Well, it seems to me after all the talk, all the questions, I should say, about to what extent Iowa represents the nation or gives us a forward-looking view at what's going to happen in the race, Iowa and New Hampshire seem to have been pretty on point in the 2024 campaign. David, it's great to see you. Don't be a stranger. He's run a lot of campaigns outside of the Iowa caucuses, and we love to stay in touch with David Kochel. Red Wave Communications getting things rolling here for us on a Monday. Super Tuesday special coverage tomorrow night. Kaylee and I will be with you starting 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And we're going to go late into the evening as we follow the time zones across the country and get a sense of how close Donald Trump might get to actually putting this in the bag. Jack Fitzpatrick's coming in next. We've got a deal on the Hill, and the text is out. This is Bloomberg.
UK, and I'm the inventor of the Gel Razor. And today I'm looking for an angel investor to fund my project, the Gel Razor, whether that's a working concept and working prototype, or manufacturing possibilities with investment, or to get me a licensing deal secured. If you go in any supermarket today, you will see packets of razors sold separately with tins of mousse or gel. Hence I did that all in one. The idea is you pressurise the handle, the gel flows through the reservoir up to the head of the razor, coating the blades, ready for shave. My target market is 18 plus, male or female, male blue version, female pink version. What I'm looking for in an investor is someone who's passionate, determined, shares my vision. That's an important step for me, and willing to succeed as I wanted to succeed myself. Patented in the UK in 2021 September. With copyright protection, I have a logo for the Gel Razor, which you will see on my LinkedIn profile. Currently working with a company in the US who have done me a lovely sell sheet. Big up to them guys. So if you're interested, contact me on LinkedIn profile, Paul J. Gwilt, GWILT, or email me at mufc219@gmail.com.
For interest rates. 10-year 4.21% with a 2-year right now 4.60%. Gold up a 1.7%, 21.17 the ounce, and a retreat for West Texas Intermediate crude 78.81 a barrel, down today by 1.5%. Bitcoin 66,968 right now. Bitcoin surging today by 6.6%. Macy's shares, they're up 15.5%. Arkhouse Management and Brigade Capital Management have boosted their offer for Macy's by 14% after the retailer turned down a previous proposal. Again, Macy's up now by 15.6%. Recapping, stocks are trading mixed. We've got the Dow Jones Industrial Average higher now by 1 point. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Joe?
Hi, Charlie Pellet. Thank you. We'll get back to Charlie a little bit later on this hour for an update on trading as we bring it back to Washington, D.C., where the text is now public. 1,050 pages, weekend reading for Jack Fitzpatrick. This is text of the minibus, if I'm using the term correctly. We did a little glossary on this last week, that pulls together 6 bills into one thing that they can vote on and keep the government from shutting down is the idea. Jack Fitzpatrick from Bloomberg Government, welcome back. $459 billion. This would actually fund a chunk of the government through September 30. That's a sort of a novel idea instead of for a couple of weeks. I guess the question is, can it pass?
It can pass. It's not going to be easy. You look at these 6 bills, and especially keeping in mind these are supposed to be the easier 6 bills.
I was going to say, this is not easy.
This isn't the Department of Defense.
Easy part.
Yeah, it's the easier part. And it is definitely a compromise. It has plenty of spending cuts the Democrats won't like, but they're not extremely dramatic. They're not quite what conservatives were going for. Yeah. There's some stuff in there for the hardline conservatives. Cut to the FBI budget. Cut about 10% cut to the EPA. There aren't major policy changes, but they did increase the threshold for instances in which VA records can be sent to the National Gun Registry, the NICS registry. But there's not a big victory for anybody in there. There are just a lot of little jagged pills to swallow. Okay. But that's a compromise.
It sounds like it. Democrats say, hey, we got $1 billion for the WIC program. Is that something that was expected? Can they not frame that as a win?
They are framing that as a win. $1 billion increase up to a little more than $7 billion for the WIC program. And if you followed this process throughout the year, you saw that nutrition aid spending was something that conservatives were looking to reduce. And to get an increase for a major nutrition aid program is a big win for Democrats. So there are victories for Democrats. There are some victories for both sides. But it's a real meeting in the middle moment.
Yeah.
They're going to try to, they need 60 votes in the Senate. They're going to see if they can get 2/3 in the House to pass this under suspension. It's probably not going to be easy, but this is the nature of compromise.
Yeah, it looks like a Wednesday vote then in the House. That's how this would start.
Right.
Goes next door in the Senate. If you're not sure about this one, though, to your point, the one that comes a week later, because the other 6 bills, the more controversial ones, including Pentagon spending, should we be worried?
We should be concerned. They have 2 more weeks. March 22nd is the deadline for those remaining bills.
Yes, thank you.
The toughest one is probably the biggest non-defense bill. It covers labor, health and human services, and education. That's one area where conservatives were pushing for a lot of policy changes regarding abortion access. That's not realistic to expect them to get much if you're going to get Democratic votes. So those bills facing the March 22nd deadline are where the immovable object and the unstoppable force meet. That's a heavier lift.
Okay, and that would come down to likely, if we did shut down, then a disagreement over abortion policy and maybe border policy with Homeland Security. Is that another
border is very tough. The fact that you have conservatives who want to cut a lot of spending and Democrats and the sort of Armed Forces Committee Republicans who don't want to cut too much money. Right. There are a few issues. Abortion, border, and just dollar figures are probably the 3 biggest issues there.
Got it. So we've got 2 weeks then to get to that point here once we clear this first deadline on the 8th. Joe Biden can't say, hey, what are you guys doing? You don't know how to run the House. That was the idea with the timing here, getting this out last night. He'll do his State of the Union Thursday. Did Mike Johnson just take an argument away from him?
Yes, it would be pretty embarrassing if the House Republicans were stumbling through this process at the moment the president comes to give the State of the Union address. We're at the point where, given House Republicans' struggles to pass their own appropriations bills, you could anticipate that they might struggle through the politics of a shutdown if there were to be one. The fact that they're teeing up a vote the day before the State of the Union, things are moving along. It takes some pressure out of the situation, and they can hammer the president on border issues and other things rather than focusing on these spending fights when he's giving a joint address.
Spending time with Jack Fitzpatrick from Bloomberg Government with a deal at hand and text to show for it. Should we expect, based on what we saw here, I mean, I guess if there is an agreement in principle before a vote, that we would then in a couple of Sundays see another 1,000 pages for the rest of the government?
More. If this was 1,000 pages and this comes out to roughly 26% of discretionary spending, it's going to be a lot of work to do the rest of the bills, a lot of money, a lot of policy riders that they had been debating, and most likely for most of it will have to cut. It's going to be a heavy lift to negotiate it and more pressure to put it out and have members scour through it, and probably more things to complain about, especially if you're one of the hardline conservatives who's not, who's somebody who tends to vote for these bills anyway.
So what are we in for on Thursday night? I want to get your take on the State of the Union. The president has been at Camp David the past couple of days punching this up. We have a sense based on Bloomberg's reporting where he's going to go. Familiar themes, higher taxes on the wealthy and businesses. He's going to do a big victory lap on the CHIPS Act and a couple of other things probably. Can he make news on any of the issues that we're talking about, though, when it comes to border, for instance? Does Congress expect any executive action to actually hit the tape and make news on Thursday night?
That's where there's a lot of pressure. It's hard to predict how this plays into the State of the Union because the Republicans are pressuring him to take executive action on something regarding the border. They're pushing him on asylum claims, and this is tied into the broader debate over Ukraine funding. That's where the pressure's been. We don't know if he's going to address that very clearly. We don't know the degree to which President Biden will speak off the cuff, which he has done. He got into a fight with them in a previous State of the Union over Social Security.
He
there's some
do that
unpredictable.
over, right?
Yes,
they're writing
they will push
copy
them
that's
on
going to
that.
bring some feedback from the crowd that he can then. I just wonder if it's not spontaneous, it gets to be risky stuff, right?
Yes, that's. I mean, that's a big question for this presidency: is how much he speaks off the cuff, how much he shoots from the hip a little bit. It sometimes works on the campaign trail. It at times has worked pretty well for him in a State of the Union address. There are some X factors and some variables to consider aside from the written text of the speech.
For sure, yeah. You got that big screen with the teleprompter at the back of the room, but that's not always the gospel. Remember last year, Kevin McCarthy asked people to calm down. There was a decorum conversation because it's been breaking down a little bit the last couple of years with hecklers and booing and all this stuff. Joe Wilson seems quaint at this point. Will we hear, or are you hearing that Mike Johnson is sending that message?
I have not heard that yet. It is something to keep in mind. I mean, there's been more personal tension in the Capitol probably since January 6, 2021, than ever before. And the personal animosity nature of that is something to keep an eye on. You can't predict if somebody's going to yell something or exactly how that's going to be. There was plenty of frustration following the Social Security debate within the State of the Union last time.
Right.
I've not heard of any guidance from leadership to members, but it's something to watch for sure.
Just the body language in the speaker's rostrum will be great, right? With Mike Johnson and Kamala Harris.
Right.
Kevin McCarthy was sitting there a year ago.
Yeah, and Johnson will be an interesting person to watch as a very new leader. Yeah. Somebody who's still trying to assert whatever authority he has as the leader of his conference. If there's somebody in a shaky position, Biden's polling aside, it's also Mike Johnson with a spotlight on him.
I can recall Kevin McCarthy trying to shush people.
Right.
Didn't work that well.
It probably wouldn't
Mike
work
Johnson
that well
would have a lot of trouble with that, I'm guessing. Yeah. So that's an important moment, though. We're talking about how to fund the rest of this fiscal year. Joe Biden's going to follow that up with a budget, right? That's the way this works.
On Monday,
for the next fiscal year.
before we're even done with these tougher bills that are due on March 22nd, on the 11th, he's making his proposal for the next year, because eventually we're almost halfway through the fiscal year. You have to put your plans out and make your request for the forthcoming bills. So clearly we're behind schedule on the rest of this
I should say
year.
we are by a lot of. So we're in a world where Jack Fitzpatrick is going to write a story about the 2025 fiscal year budget that Joe Biden is dropping before we have a budget for 2024. That is accurate, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Just making sure that's the case. It's going to get a little worse each year for you, I'm starting to think. You'll just be a full year behind at some point. I don't know how you compartmentalize all this stuff, but you certainly do a great job, and it's great to have you back. Jack Fitzpatrick at Bloomberg Government, of course, a longtime friend of the family here. He shares this microphone from time to time as well on Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. I want to bring you up to date on things before we assemble our panel. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are up next after we hear from Nancy Lyons with world and national news in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington. Hi, Nancy.
Thanks, Joe. The Supreme Court, in a unanimous decision, says former President Trump is eligible for Colorado's presidential primary ballot. Derek Muller, professor at Notre Dame Law School, says the court ruled on whether a state can bar an official from being on the ballot based on the insurrectionist clause in the Constitution.
All 9 justices agreed. States just have no power to enforce this on their own. It's something that needs to be left to another actor in another stage of the political process.
Mueller says the justices in their ruling pointed to Congress as being the best branch to deal with the question. Congress has a detailed agreement to fund large parts of the government through September 30th, and they hope it can be enacted before another shutdown deadline on Friday. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is sounding optimistic.
The fact that the 4 leaders, House, Senate, Democrat, and Republican, have reached an agreement bodes well that the government will not run out of funds and shut down by Friday.
The package, covering about a quarter of funding for government agencies, represents the first real progress toward resolving ideological differences. The California dig-out is still underway in towns and on the roads in the Sierra Nevadas after a monster storm dropped tons of fresh powder on the region. People are being warned to stay off the roads as snowplows work to keep them clear. Interstate 80 had to be shut down due to the storm, leaving many truck drivers like this one stranded in nearby towns.
Mother Nature has a way of showing us who's in charge. So, yeah, I just kind of go with the flow and just put it in God's good hands.
Forecasters say another snowstorm may impact the area later this week, bringing in as much as 2 feet of snow. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nancy Lyons. This is Bloomberg.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Stocks are trading mixed. S&P right now up by 0.5 point. Little change there. The Dow down 0.1%. Nasdaq down 0.2. 10-year yield 4.21%. And Bitcoin right now above 67,000, up 6.8%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Joe?
All right, Charlie, thanks. I want to bring our viewers and listeners down to Mar-a-Lago. The former president has just started speaking. He's in the living room with us now live. You can hear on Bloomberg Radio and see it on YouTube following a ruling today by the Supreme Court that allows him to be on the ballot across the country following a 14th Amendment challenge. Let's listen live to Donald Trump.
We don't have a president because nobody that is serving in that office will have the courage to make, in many cases, what would be the right decision, or it could be the wrong decision. It could be, in some cases, the wrong decision, but they have to make decisions, and they have to make them free of all terror that can be rained upon them when they leave office or even before they leave office. And some decisions are very tough. I can tell you that as a president, that some decisions to make are very tough. I took out ISIS, and I took out some very big people from the standpoint of a different part of the world. Two of the leading terrorists, probably the two leading terrorists ever that we've ever seen in this world. And those are big decisions. I don't want to be prosecuted for it. Another president wouldn't want to be prosecuted for it. It had a tremendously positive impact. It stopped everything cold. And sometimes you have to make, they were tough decisions. Sometimes you have to make decisions like that. When you make a decision, you don't want to have your opposing party or opponent or even somebody that just thinks you're wrong bring a criminal suit against you or any kind of a suit when you leave office. I have that right now at a level that nobody's ever seen before. I have rogue prosecutors and I have rogue judges. I have judges that are out of control. And it's a very unfair thing for me, but serving perhaps as a sample to others of what should not be happening. When you make good decisions, and in my case, the economy was great. We didn't go into any wars. We totally defeated ISIS. We provided the largest tax cuts in history. We provided the largest regulation cuts in history. But think of it, no wars. We beat ISIS 100% of the caliphate. And there were no wars. We did a job that was great, but maybe I wouldn't have done that. The caliphate, defeating them, was very powerful. It was going to take 4 years. It took me 4 months. But it was a very strong dictum that I gave. I said, get them, defeat them, end it. We were fighting for 20 years against ISIS, and we did it very quickly. I don't want to be prosecuted. In that case, it worked out very well. There will be some things that perhaps don't work out so well, but I don't want to be prosecuted because I decided to do something that is very much for the good of the country and actually for the good of the world. A president shouldn't have that on his mind, and he has to have a free and clear mind when he makes very big decisions, or it's going to be nothing more than a ceremonial post. You'll be president, it'll be a wonderful thing, and you won't do anything because you don't want to be hit by your opponent or hit by somebody else, because who wants to leave office and go through what I've gone through? I'm being prosecuted by Biden, my opponent, because every one of these things, whether it's Fannie Willis or Bragg, these are local and state, but they're in total coordination with the White House. You can't do that. It shouldn't be done. I mean, a thing like that. In the case of the DA's office, they put one of the top people, maybe the second person, in the Manhattan DA's office to get Trump. They had a Hillary Clinton lawyer leave the law firm, very prestigious big law firm, leave the law firm to go into the DA's office to get Trump, Pomerantz, Mr. Pomerantz. So he goes in to become a prosecutor, worked for the Democrat Party and Hillary Clinton, goes in to prosecute Donald Trump at a local
Donald
level.
Trump speaking live from Mar-a-Lago. We thought we'd get a sense of what it was he's talking about, and I'm still trying to figure that out, having heard from the Supreme Court earlier today. He was not speaking to the case at hand here involving the 14th Amendment, as the court ruled he will be allowed on the ballot in Colorado and the other states that had moved to remove him. He apparently was speaking further about the next case we're waiting the Supreme Court to rule in on, which is presidential immunity, in ad-libbed speech there that didn't seem to have too much direction. Let's assemble our panel with Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, Bloomberg Politics contributors. It's great to have both of you with us here. I have to ask you, I guess, about Donald Trump's legal status to start here by way of that ruling today. I don't think either of you expected that he would be knocked off the ballot. But Rick Davis, do you agree with Republicans who say it's a good thing because the people should be deciding elections, not the court?
Yeah, first of all, yes, people should decide elections, not the court. And if there are issues of insurrection, which in this case are arguable, then it should be the federal government that makes that decision, not a state government. You can imagine the chaos if states started pulling people off of state ballots just because they may disagree with the policy or program. We've already seen that happen at the federal level with impeachment. Last thing we want to do is see states started. So I think the Supreme Court did the right thing, and it's notable that it was a unanimous decision with no dissent. So I think it makes total sense.
Your thought on this, Jeannie? Joe Biden has said repeatedly he wants to beat him at the ballot box. He didn't want the Supreme Court to stand on the way here, right?
No, and neither did I. I mean, I wrote an editorial in January in the Washington Examiner, which said precisely that. I mean, putting aside the legal aspects of this decision, politically, had the court gone the other way, that would have been a death knell for Democrats. They need to beat Donald Trump at the ballot box. So politically, this is absolutely the best outcome for Democrats. And the reason, of course, Donald Trump is talking about the next case up in the Supreme Court on immunity on January 6th, as opposed to this one today, is because he knows full well, and everybody knew that the court was going to come down this way today on the ballot issue. The bigger question and the more difficult one for us to read the tea leaves on is the immunity one. And I think that is likely, and I believe Donald Trump believes it is likely not to go in his favor. You know, this idea, as they said in the appellate court, that he could shoot somebody and, you know, a SEAL team member, have them executed and then not be held responsible for that, is so out of the realm of democratic norms that I'm hard pressed to believe the court says he has absolute immunity, or any other president for that matter.
Well, let's talk about some actual ballots, because we saw a couple of them over the weekend. We're going to see a lot more tomorrow. Donald Trump sweeps Missouri, Idaho, Michigan over the weekend, and he is on track, it appears, Rick, to be the presumptive nominee by the 12th of March, by a week from tomorrow. There is a narrative out there that Nikki Haley is doing better now than she has yet. She won her first primary, and I realize it was in the D.C. Primary, the District of Columbia. Nobody's taken that terribly seriously, but what's it going to look like after tomorrow night? Is Nikki Haley really going to keep pushing this as Donald Trump walks into 15 states he might win?
You know, no telling what her motivation is. I think we've talked about it in many cases. It depends upon whether or not people continue to fund her campaign. Everybody's going to see something different in the kind of quixotic effort she's putting forth to contrast with him. She has been getting tougher and tougher on him in the press. So I imagine she sees this as an opportunity to create a contrast and maybe create some space for her in the Republican Party, certainly in the mainstream party. I would say that he may or may not get to the 50% point by the 12th, probably more likely the 19th, where you have a slew of states like Arizona and Florida and Illinois, Kansas, and Ohio. That's kind of the end game. But the bottom line is nobody thinks that Donald Trump isn't going to be the nominee, and he's sort of acting accordingly by taking over the RNC and doing the things he's doing. But this nagging, presence of Nikki Haley on a campaign trail, even though it doesn't have a legitimate strategy and victory, is going to keep him, from having a clean shot. And so there are a lot of Republicans who just want that to stay keep her in the race for as long as humanly possible.
There you have it. D.C. primary, Nikki Haley 63%, Donald Trump 33%. 2,035 people voted. The Trump campaign says Haley has now been, quote, crowned queen of the swamp, unquote. I'm Joe Matthew. Knee deep in the swamp. Rick and Jeannie have more ahead. This is Bloomberg.
Your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. New York Community Bank shares are plunging again today, down for a second straight day after a pair of rating downgrades threatened to boost the beleaguered bank's borrowing costs. Fitch Ratings cut its assessment to non-investment grade. Moody's, which already had a junk rating on the bank, lowered it even further. NYCB now down by about 15.5%. American Airlines has agreed to buy 260 short-haul aircraft that include a massive deal for Boeing's 737 MAX jets. A key endorsement of the plane maker as it works through a crisis of confidence following a near catastrophic accident in January. Shares of American Airlines today, they are lower now by 4%. Boeing shares up 0.4%. Lyft trading higher after RBC Capital Markets speculated about a partnership between the ride-hailing service and food delivery firm DoorDash, with the broker upgrading both to outperform. Lyft up 5%, DoorDash up 5%. Rival Uber is trading higher by 0.2%. JetBlue Airways has formally abandoned its pursuit of Spirit Airlines. So where does this leave JetBlue? George Ferguson is senior aerospace analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence.
I think JetBlue can go back to being what JetBlue is, and that is a really good East Coast, Caribbean, largely leisure airline with upscale in their Mint program. And I think if they ultimately want to be a carrier that has the full U.S. domestic footprint, I think they got to look at maybe a different partner that would that has more similar culture they could get together with.
And JetBlue now up by 1.5%. Spirit is plunging 14.8%. Those are our top company stories at this hour. I'm Charlie Pelletin. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Balance of Power with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
Live from Washington with our signature panel in place. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us. Kaylee Lines, by the way, will join the conversation coming up in 5 minutes in hour 2 of Balance of Power as we consider the primaries over the weekend and what is about to take place tomorrow. We haven't mentioned Joe Biden because, of course, these are competitive Republican races, but there's polling out today from the Wall Street Journal that makes you wonder if Joe Biden can stick the landing when it comes to timing. And we've talked about this prospect before. Inflation comes together at just the right time. The soft landing is there, all happening in the fall as people make up their decision, make up their minds on who to vote for with the economy, if not the top, near the top of the issues that they'll be using to decide. Check this out. 31% of voters in this Wall Street Journal survey said the economy had gotten better over the past 2 years. Yeah, 2 years, the majority of Joe Biden's tenure. That's an increase of 10 percentage points from a Journal poll in December. More where that came from, 43% say their personal finances are heading in the right direction. That's a 9-point increase from the prior survey. And so we bring in the panel for their take on this. Jeannie, when you look at these numbers, do you see Joe Biden looking across the valley to a victory?
Yeah, I mean, these numbers are very good for him. If I was advising him, I would say get out there and start talking about what this poll found, because these are good numbers for you, overshadowing the much more troubling numbers by the New York Times Siena this week, not to mention Bloomberg's the week before. So he should be out there talking about this. And of course, I hope in the State of the Union, this does come up, because you see an increase over December, as you just mentioned, in a couple of these points by 9-10%. And that is exactly where he wants to be. We're in, these are February numbers. We are in March. And of course, the hope is for the Biden campaign, by the time this rolls around in November, people are feeling much better about the economy, and these numbers suggest they may well be.
What do you think about this, Rick, when you consider the amount of time that we have left to November? You were quick to point out in the early Bloomberg swing state polls that people were indicating some level of optimism about their local economy. Is this a further projection on where that optimism might go?
Yeah, this kind of tracks exactly what our Bloomberg polls were showing. It tracks what the Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index has shown, improving sentiment amongst voters toward Bidenomics. I hate to even use that term. I would say, though, in this Wall Street Journal poll, it does show that 2 out of 3 people still say inflation is headed in the wrong direction. So there's work to be done by the Biden administration to convince them that the grocery prices they see come up will come down, and that's a harder sell. I would say, though, the underlying problem that Biden has is, as people look past the economy, what are they looking at? Immigration. And in this poll, 65% say they disapprove of Biden's handling the immigration. So he has got to get something done on that in order to ensure that his success at handling the economy doesn't turn out to be the administration's failure at the border.
Well, that's all true, Jeannie. We should point out that Joe Biden's losing to Donald Trump in all 7 swing states in our poll. And you mentioned that Siena College New York Times poll from over the weekend. Trump wins nationally by 4 points. We've got less than a minute. Do we care about that national number yet?
I think if they should pay attention to these, obviously. These are solid polls, solid poll numbers. Again, the Wall Street Journal poll, though, had a 2% lead by Trump within the margin. But, the trajectory, when you look at these overall, is in the wrong direction. This is a race that will be decided in those swing states. That's why Bloomberg is polling there. But the overall sentiment is important for them, and they've got to contrast that on Thursday in the State of the Union.
There you have it from our signature panel, Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis. They'll be back with us in hour 2 to take a deeper dive on the campaign as Kaylee joins the conversation next. Hour 2 of Balance of Power starts right now.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
The Supreme Court rules in favor of Donald Trump a day before Super Tuesday. Welcome to the fastest show in politics. With a ruling today on ballot access, I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lines here in Washington. Kaylee, we've also got a 1,000-page bill out of the House and Senate that makes you wonder if we might avoid a government shutdown. Welcome to Monday.
Welcome to Monday on what is going to be an insane week, of course, bookended by the decision from the Supreme Court and a shutdown deadline on Friday for just 6 parts of the government, and that's why you have 6 bills combined together in a, are we calling it a mega bus?
It's a minibus.
A minibus.
I think we're going minibus.
So 1,050 pages counts as mini in Washington.
I guess that's true. That's just the first one.
Right.
The next one should have about 3 times as many. So we've got some reading to do.
Absolutely. And then, of course, the deadline following this Friday is 2 Fridays from then, March 22nd, when we will be, Joe, just 3 days out from the start of Donald Trump's criminal trial in New York City. Of course, that begins on the 25th.
Don't look too far down that calendar. It might get frustrating. To Kaylee's point, this week alone, we have the Supreme Court ruling this morning, Super Tuesday tomorrow, Jay Powell testimony Wednesday, the State of the Union Thursday, and a potential shutdown on Friday. And we will be with you for all of it here on Balance of Power.
It's going to be a rough one. So buckle your seatbelts. Charlie Pellet, you got your seatbelts buckled? What's going on financial markets? Rocky ride or no?
We've got one more to add to the list, and that is the jobs report on Friday. Indeed, very busy week ahead on the markets desk right now. We are looking at a mixed day on Wall Street. The S&P holding on to a gain barely, up by just half a point. Dow Industrials right now down 47, lower by 0.1%. We've got NASDAQ down 27, drop there of 0.2%. 10-year yield 4.22% with a 2-year right now 4.60%. Spot gold up 1.6%, 21.16 the ounce, and crude down 1.5%, 78.79 a barrel. Bitcoin surging 6.6% right now with a $67,000 handle. Bitcoin just above that level right now at $67,000.50. Right now we've got the S&P, as I mentioned, trading higher, little changed, up by 1 point now. Apple has been hit with a $2 billion penalty from the European Union over an investigation into allegations that shut out music streaming rivals, including Spotify, on its platforms. Apple today now trading lower by 3.2%. Again, recapping U.S. stocks mix. The Dow, the S&P, they are trading mixed, with the S&P up 1 point, the Dow down 50, NASDAQ lower by 25. I'm Charlie Pellet in New York. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to a very busy Washington, and Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines.
All right, Charlie Pellet, very busy indeed here in Washington, and it's only Monday. Thank you so much. And of course, Joe, we kick off this week with news from the Supreme Court, frankly, with just about a day to spare, making a decision that Trump can appear on the ballot in Colorado ahead of Colorado's primary tomorrow, of course, just one of the 16 Super Tuesday states.
Yeah, that's right. How about it? What timing here? And I guess that had a lot to do with it, Kaylee. But of course, there were other states that had done the very same thing to Donald Trump. They will all now have to have him back on the ballot. We've checked a box. At least one question that was hanging over this campaign has been answered. Of course, a lot of folks knew that a ruling was coming from the Supreme Court, may have hoped it involved presidential immunity, but that's going to be a longer wait. We've got arguments coming in April, and that's going to take some time.
Yeah, and I wonder if the expediency with which the court dealt with this particular case can be applicable to other cases, knowing that they were facing the deadline of the primary taking place this week. Will they act as quickly in the immunity from prosecution question that the former president has brought before it?
Greg Storer reminded me earlier, they ruled in Bush v. Gore in 3 days because they had to. And when you have to, when there's a real deadline, maybe could be a surprise for us. But it's something that we wanted to talk about with Eric Larson. Of course, he covers the legal world, not just for Donald Trump, although that's been his full-time job for us recently here at Bloomberg. Eric, it's great to see you. Pretty interesting to get a heads up on a Sunday night from the Supreme Court. We all knew pretty early on that this would be an important ruling.
Yeah, we sure did. They didn't explicitly say, that this was what they were going to rule on, but the writing was on the wall there because of the timing issue that you pointed out. And also after the oral arguments, you might recall that the justices, the questions that they asked, they did seem very skeptical of what the Colorado Supreme Court had ruled. So this outcome isn't totally surprising. I think that the fact that it's unanimous, too, at least on the main issue, just shows how a little bit of unity there on such a significant issue that is also very politically divisive.
Absolutely. And as you said, the court didn't explicitly tell us what they were going to be ruling on. They also didn't explicitly tell us what they thought of the insurrection question, whether or not Trump engaged in it in this ruling, right? Their grounds for overturning Colorado's decision is based on the idea that they think this authority should rest with Congress, not with the states. They didn't touch the insurrection question.
That's right. And even when we had this concurring opinion from the three liberal justices, even that didn't really weigh in on this issue. And their questioning during arguments didn't focus on that either. So clearly they wanted to focus on this one technical issue, the 14th Amendment, Section 3, passed after the Civil War to keep members of the Confederacy out of Congress and in this case also from running for president. They just said, look, the framers, they only wanted for federal office, for the questions of federal office, it should just be Congress. Of course, these justices who agreed but wrote a separate opinion said that is not, they went too far by saying that only Congress can enforce Section 3. They said there was nothing in there about it. They flat out said that it kind of protects future insurrectionists, insulates them from being attacked under this provision.
Well, at least we've got that to come out of today. Eric, what's the next stop on the road here for us then in Donald Trump's legal saga, the long and winding road? Is it New York on the 25th?
Well, yeah, March 25th is the first date of the so-called hush money criminal trial here brought by the Manhattan DA. Of course, before that, though, we're going to be looking to see what happens with the huge verdicts that Trump has been hit with these two civil trials that he lost this year. On March 9th is when he is supposed to pay an $83 million judgment to E. Jean Carroll or post a bond for more than that amount to allow him to put it on hold while he appeals. So I'm very curious to see what happens with that bond because he's already asked to delay it and a judge will decide whether or not he can delay it soon.
Well, speaking of delay, obviously attempting to delay the trial here in Washington, the Jack Smith election interference case that has been brought against the former president has in part been because of this question around presidential immunity. Of course, an appeals court here in D.C. ruled that he is not immune from prosecution as a former president, but now the Supreme Court is going to hear those arguments. They're not going to do so until April 22nd, I believe. Eric, should we draw a line from just the few weeks it took for them to hear arguments in the 14th Amendment case and then to rule, as we could see a similar timeline in that case, or would we expect that ruling will take longer, knowing there isn't this kind of primary day deadline that the court will be dealing with?
Right. I mean, that's a really good question. A lot of Supreme Court experts have been weighing in one way or the other, whether or not really what this boils down to is if the Supreme Court does turn away Trump's presidential immunity defense, which a lot of people suspect it may, then can a trial, which could last up to 3 months, actually take place and get a verdict from a jury well before the November election? And some folks believe that it can, but it does come down to how long the Supreme Court takes to issue a ruling there. Obviously, it's a hugely consequential ruling, which could set the precedent for whether or not a former president can be criminally charged over anything that they do in office. So I would think that if their idea is to let voters know whether or not someone who's running for president actually tried to overturn the previous election, perhaps that's something that the Supreme Court would think voters should know about well before they go to the polls.
The fact that we're talking about this, every now and then you have to stop down and just remind yourself that this is reality. Eric, we're really having this conversation. That Bragg trial in New York was expected to run about 6 weeks. Is that right?
That's
to start on the 25th?
Yeah, and I believe
so
that
we
may
go through
include
a 6-week trial. That brings us pretty deep into the campaign, and he's a presumptive nominee at that point. We would have a verdict then as well?
I would think so. It's going to take a little while to pick a jury here. It's going to take at least, I think, maybe 2 weeks of that 6 weeks, I'm told. But I would expect that the verdict would be pretty quick. It's not a very complicated case at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's just many of the same count, right, when it comes to the felony with which he's been charged. I guess it is kind of multi-part in that there is the document in question and then the fact that it was used to violate campaign finance law specifically, which is what escalates this particular crime from a misdemeanor to a felony. So is that a complicating factor here, Eric? The idea that you kind of have to decide two things at once, whether he committed that initial crime and then whether it is justifiably a felony?
Right, it definitely does complicate the case. As far as whether or not it will complicate the trial, I'm not so sure. Trump has filed a motion seeking to block the prosecution from even suggesting at trial that he tried to overturn tried to influence the 2016 election by paying this hush money. So that's a key part of the prosecution. A ruling on that could come fairly soon, given the timeline here. But if the prosecution is restricted from making that argument, it raises the question about the severity of the charges to begin with. But it's kind of a long shot, but I do think it's something that a jury could understand if it's allowed to go forward.
All right, Eric Larson, who reports on all legal matters for us here at Bloomberg. Thank you so much. Now, of course, we have talked a lot about the former president's legal troubles and how it influences the 2024 electoral politics at the presidential level. We have a lot more to talk about down the ballot, not just in terms of congressional races, but also state races as well. There's some governorships up for grabs.
Yeah, Super Tuesday is tomorrow, and of course, we're in the throes of a campaign cycle that's being seen here in Washington in a different light this time because it's impacting policymaking on Capitol Hill. Donald Trump's the one who took credit for stopping the budget deal, the supplemental funding for Ukraine. So you really can't have one conversation without the other here, Kaylee, because what's happening in Washington is being discussed on the campaign trail and vice versa. We got a 1,000-page bill out last night, as we discussed a little while ago, that might keep the government from shutting down, unless, of course, Donald Trump says
Yeah, might keep the government from shutting down is probably the correct way of phrasing that at this point in time. And of course, when Joe and I talk about Washington, in this context, we're talking about Washington, D.C., not the state of Washington.
Correct.
But that actually is where we would like to go
this segment.
Next, live to Seattle, where a Republican candidate for the governor of Washington is joining us now. Dave Reichert, great to have you on the show, sir. Of course, you are running as a Republican in a state pretty dominated by Democrats. It's been decades since someone of your party was elected governor. Why is the time where someone like you could do it now?
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. I've run in districts, of course, when I was in the U.S. Congress that was pretty much dominated by Democrats, too. But the timing's right. The issues are right. It's been 40 years since we have had a Republican governor here in Washington State. The seat is going to be open this time around. And I've looked at the race, and I really believe that the issues really line up with my experience. And those issues are obviously public safety, and secondly is homelessness, which is really substance abuse and mental illness. And then third is the economy. And I also like to talk about education a lot. And people are looking for some moderation.
Mr. Reichert, you were, of course, a congressman, and I wonder, when you look back to the debate around that period of time, if you recognize the Republican conference that we have today in Washington.
Absolutely do. I have watched some of that discussion. You don't really disconnect from that world after you leave it, so you find yourself on C-SPAN sort of following some of the committees, sadly.
Well, and of course, speaking of still being involved in the world after you leave it, at this point, Donald Trump isn't even the Republican nominee. He's just a former Republican president, and yet it's been proven that he actually holds a great deal of sway in the halls on Capitol Hill, and it has kind of underscored, sir, if you will, that there are some more Trump allied Republicans and then those that are not so much. How do you present your campaign to both ends of that spectrum of what the Republican Party is today? Is that really possible?
It is possible. Fortunately, I've had the opportunity to work with President Bush and President Obama and President Trump, and I still have a lot of friends back in the House of Representatives and also on the Senate side and from both parties. So I think there's a great advantage in having those relationships already built in Washington, D.C. As a member of Congress for 14 years, I think that being able to carry our message of what Washington State needs and how we want to move forward here in a way that's really listening to every community here in Washington State and every viewpoint, which it hasn't happened. The government that we've had in Washington State for the last 40 years really has shut out the people of Washington State.
You referred to, I think, your time in law enforcement, your career before you were in the world of politics, Congressman. You're a sheriff, and you've been hearing Republicans criticize the city of Portland on a regular basis, along with others, including Seattle, going back to a couple of years ago here. And I wonder if you think the narrative surrounding crime in our inner cities is accurate.
It's absolutely accurate. Everywhere I go in the state of Washington, this is the #1 issue that's been brought up, and that's crime and safety. People are worried about going to work and even in going home, their kids going to school, and being safe. We are 51st in the country as it relates to the number of police officers per capita protecting the citizens of Washington State, 51st including Washington, D.C. Seattle PD is 400 people down. King County Sheriff's about 150 people down. Our crime rate in Washington State is actually increasing rather than decreasing. We're letting violent criminals out of our state prison. So yes, I really believe my experience in law enforcement is going to be very beneficial here in this campaign. Look, I was a hostage negotiator when I was in the sheriff's office. I was also a SWAT commander, so I know when to negotiate and I know when to kick the damn door down. It's time to kick the door down.
Well, on needing to negotiate, just finally, we have about a minute left with you, sir. Even if you were to win as a Republican governor, it's highly likely that Democrats would still control the state legislature. How do you get anything done in that scenario?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. I fully anticipate working with House Democrats and Senate Democrats. I think it really creates an opportunity here in the state for us to begin a dialogue with the other party. And I think people here in Washington State actually want a balanced government this time around. They want to see that dialogue created. They want to see a conversation between ideas and differing ideas to solve the problems that we're facing today.
He's running for governor of Washington, the former Congressman Dave Reichert. We thank you for the time, Congressman, with us today on Bloomberg. Kaylee, a fascinating discussion as we look at another race with national implications.
Absolutely, and a lot of the issues that he just brought up, including the issue of crime, we know is a national issue at play at all levels on the ballot this year, including, of course, 2024. And we're going to have more on that with our political panel coming up next, right here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. 121 right now on Wall Street. Stocks are trading lower across the board with the S&P 500 index down 2 points right now. Little change, down less than 0.1%. We've got the Dow down 91, drop there of 0.2%. And NASDAQ, the composite index, down 38, a decline there of 0.2%. That relentless rally in stocks taking a breather today as traders await this week's batch of jobs data and remarks from Fed officials as they look for clues about the path of interest rates ahead. We've got the S&P now down 2, drop there of 0.1%. Dow Industrials lower by 94, drop there of 0.2, while the NASDAQ Composite Index is down 40, a drop there also of 0.2%. 10-year 4.22%, the 2-year 4.61%. Spot gold up 1.6%, 21.16 the ounce. Bitcoin up 6% now, 66,000 on Bitcoin. And West Texas Intermediate crude today is advancing today. We've got actually crude lower now by 0.9%, 78.77 for a barrel of WTI. JetBlue has formally abandoned its pursuit of Spirit Airlines. Right now, JetBlue is up 1.5%. Spirit down 14.6%. And American Airlines has agreed to buy 260 short-haul aircraft that include a massive deal for Boeing 737 MAX jets. Boeing up 0.2%. American Airlines down 4.5%. Recapping, S&P down 3 right now, less than 0.1%. Balance of power continues. Back we go to Washington, and once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
Charlie Pellet live in New York. Thank you so much, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons, myself, live on Bloomberg TV and radio from Washington, where we all are just taking a deep, steadying breath, bracing for the week that is still to come. It's been a busy Monday already, Joe. We got out of the Supreme Court a decision that Trump can be on the ballot in Colorado and therefore nationally because it comes from the highest court in the land. But really, it's tomorrow that begins the real marathon because we have 16 states in which there will be primaries. It will be Super Tuesday.
Yes, Super Tuesday. Covered a lot of Super Tuesdays, never with Kaylee Lyons at my side. I'm looking forward to this because we're not going to have a presumptive nominee when it's done, Kaylee, but Donald Trump will likely be a long way down that road, and we want to assemble our panel for their take this day before. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, of course, are with us, Bloomberg politics contributors in our signature panel here on Balance of Power. Take us to school, Rick. Super Tuesday, what you'll actually be watching tomorrow night, because a lot of people think they already know how this movie ends.
Yeah, I think that there are some things I'm looking at vis-a-vis the Trump versus Haley contest. I think that you look at places like Vermont, Massachusetts, as places she might be able to get into her sort of upper competitive level, like 40% of the vote. Maybe California, even though it's a winner-take-all, is she still getting that kind of vote potential out of moderates and independents? Most of these states have open primaries, so she'll be able to contest the election same way she did in New Hampshire. So I think that's one aspect of it that I'm looking at. And two, I think also just how much Republicans still care about this race. I mean, what are going to be the levels of turnout? Because arguably this may be the last gasp of a competitive race, and have people pretty much turned the page and decided they're not going to participate in what's basically a foregone conclusion.
Well, Jeannie, is it possible that actually the reverse happens, where any anti-Trump Republican or independently minded voter decides this is really the last chance to get behind Nikki Haley to try to make sure he isn't the nominee and shows out in full force? Is there any indication a scenario like that could happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. If we believe the polls, it's probably unlikely. You know, places I'm watching, say, Northern Virginia, for instance, if Nikki Haley has a shot anywhere, it's going to be a place like Northern Virginia. That's going to be those kinds of areas in which you see the more educated, more traditional, what Donald Trump described this weekend as the old Mitt Romney type of Republican. You know, does she do better in those kinds kinds of places. And then, of course, as Rick just discussed, turnout is going to be critical. We've seen, fairly robust turnout, but, does that start to dissipate because people believe, for instance, that Donald Trump essentially has this wrapped up? Or to your point, do we see people out there casting protest votes, quote unquote? And we do have a few states that are open primaries. And then we have some states in which if you aren't affiliated, you can vote and decide which ballot you're going to be on. So be watching those as well.
Rick, you're looking at March 19th, I think, for Donald Trump to have this in the bag, mathematically speaking, as we head for 12/15. Is that the date he'll shut it down?
Yeah, I think so. That's the safe date. He's got the ability to maybe do better by trying to get it done by March 12th. But that's a real close call. He's got to win 90% of all the delegates on Super Tuesday to be even in the category of being able to lock up the nomination. When I say lock up, that's 50 plus one of the 2,429 delegates that are eligible for the Republican convention. So I think it's so much as a foregone conclusion, but he likes to try and wrap it up early. And frankly, March 19th is relatively early, but won't be the earliest that anybody's ever done it.
Yeah, well, it does set us up, though, for what's going to be a very long general election campaign. Rick, what kind of margin in any of these states, even if he does indeed sweep them, he's picking up delegates along the way, what would still look weak for a Donald Trump general election candidate?
Well, I think we've seen that states where Nikki Haley has done well, she's broken into the 40% mark. If she did that repeatedly in half of these states, it would really show a sign that the Republican Party, a big chunk of it, almost half, are rejecting the Trump candidacy. And I think that will start more of the stories we've already heard, which is if a certain percentage of those, and in some polls as many as half of those people, indicate they won't support Donald Trump in the general election, that could be a really devastating thing for Donald Trump. Now, we won't get exit polls in all these 15 states, so we're not going to have that kind of robust information. But I would say if she was able to do that in half the states, or even a good chunk of the bigger, more important ones, like Virginia that Jeannie was talking about earlier, it could send a real message to the party that we've got a real fight for party control.
Talk to me about the pledge, Jeannie. I'm getting confused here because Nikki Haley said she would endorse whomever the Republican nominee would be. Remember, that was the pledge to get on stage in the debates. Now she says maybe not. I'll make what decision I want to make, she told Meet the Press, indicating that this is not the same RNC that she had made that agreement with. Is that fair game?
Yeah, I mean, she can do what she wants. This is the problem with these pledges. Donald Trump has never been willing to make them. Nikki Haley made it. She said this weekend she had to get on the stage, and now this party is not the party she pledged to support the nominee for. So we'll have to see what she does. The reality is I think her failure to say that she won't vote for Donald Trump if he's the nominee has given a lot of voters pause to say, well, if you're going to support him in the end, then why are you telling us that he doesn't have what it takes to be president, that he can't be trusted to be president? That's a hard argument to make, to say, vote for me, but, if you don't and he ends up getting the nomination, I'll vote for him as well. That's a really difficult thing. So I think this pledge issue has been a lot more important in the minds of some Republican voters than we may otherwise expect.
Okay, so that's all Republican voters. And on the Republican side, Jeannie, what's at stake for Biden tomorrow, knowing that this isn't really a competitive primary he's dealing with, even if you have others still floating around? What will be telling about his performance tomorrow, if anything? What can we learn?
For Biden, you're going to be looking for turnout. I think particularly in certain states, I'm looking, for instance, at a state like North Carolina, for instance, which he narrowly loses to Donald Trump, but they do feel like that is up for grabs this year. I'm not sure if that's the case, but they are trying to ramp up operations in these states. So I think that's one big issue. The other thing is, you look at a state like Alabama, which votes, and, they've been going through this whole issue with the IVF. Now, we're not going to get a specific indication on that, but I am curious to see if we see a significant ramp up in turnout there, whether that indicates that this issue is on the minds of voters who might not otherwise get out. So issues like that we'll be watching for the Democratic side. Joe Biden rather is looking at Thursday in particular. And I think what happens Tuesday night will weigh in terms of what he has to say Thursday night.
Yeah, of course, that's the State of the Union. Rick, if you're running the Biden campaign, and I know you're not in this case, that's your night this week, right? That's the biggest, potentially the most important audience he could get this entire cycle.
Well, certainly between now and his convention speech, this is probably one of the most important things he can do. And I'm sure that everybody in the White House has exactly the same goal in mind. He has to look energetic. He has to be articulate. He can't produce a gaffe. He has to not fall asleep. I mean, he has to not make sure other people fall asleep. I mean, it's all about Joe Biden's presence and almost nothing to do with substance.
I like that, Kaylee. You can't fall asleep and you can't let other people fall asleep. That's
Sure.
literally the job.
But Jeannie, is really nothing at all to do with substance?
No, I would say the substance matters an awful lot because he has to very clearly not only say what he has done and the successes he's had, but what he plans to do going forward. And he also has to shine a big light on the Republicans who control the House and who have not been doing the work of the American people, and to make the case that you cannot trust Washington, D.C. to either them or the presumptive leader of the party, Donald Trump, because this is a dangerous guy. So I think he wants to cast the light on them as well as talk about what he plans to do going forward. He does have successes to talk about.
All right. Well, of course, Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis will be with us on State of the Union night to break down all of the substance or not in the president's speech. And they'll be with us tomorrow for Super Tuesday and later on this evening. It's a busy week for all of us here on Team Balance of Power. Now, though, let's go check on another member of the team and get world and national news with Nancy Lyons in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom here in Washington. Hey, Nancy.
Thanks, Kaylee. Former President Trump will remain on Colorado's ballot after a unanimous Supreme Court decision today. The case revolved around whether Trump could be banned under a rarely used constitutional provision barring insurrectionists from holding office. Trump is happy with the ruling.
You cannot take somebody out of a race. The voters can take the person out of the race very quickly, but a court shouldn't be doing that, and the Supreme Court saw that very well.
Trump also thanked the court and says the decision will unify the country. Former Trump CFO Alan Weisselberg has pleaded guilty to perjury for his testimony in the recent civil fraud trial against former President Trump. He's already spent some 100 days in prison for tax fraud. Israeli cabinet member Benny Gantz, a rival of Prime Minister Netanyahu, will be meeting with Vice President Kamala Harris this afternoon. Harris said over the weekend Israel has to do more to protect Palestinian civilians and allow more aid in.
No excuses. They must open new border crossings. They must not impose any unnecessary restrictions on the delivery of aid.
Again, Vice President Harris. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nancy Lyons. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg World Headquarters. I'm Charlie Pellet. 1:40 the time now on Wall Street. We are looking at a down day on Wall Street. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all declining. Little change on the S&P right now, with the S&P down 2 points, down less than 0.1%. The relentless rally in stocks is taking a breather as traders await this week's batch of jobs data and remarks from Fed officials for clues about the outlook of interest rates. The S&P now down by 1 point. Again, little change, down less than 0.1%. Dow Industrials down 90, a decline right now of 0.2%. NASDAQ down 35, a decline also of 0.2%. 10-year 4.22%, with a 2-year that's now yielding 4.60%. Spot gold up 1.5%, 21.15 the ounce. Crude is down 1.7%. West Texas Intermediate crude 78.60 a barrel. And Bitcoin, big story today, now at 66,380. Bitcoin up by 5.6%. Apple has been hit with a $2 billion penalty from the European Union over an investigation into allegations it shut out music streaming rivals, including Spotify, on its platforms. Apple shares are lower now. Apple is down by 3.1%. Again, recapping stocks lower, S&P now down by 2 points. I'm Charlie Pellet in New York. Back we go to Washington as Balance of Power continues. Once again, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet, we do thank you. Greetings from Washington and welcome to the fastest show in politics, Balance of Power, here on Bloomberg TV, radio, and YouTube. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm looking forward to the State of the Union here and what's just going to be a wild week. We've got Super Tuesday, Powell testimony, State of the Union, and a potential shutdown, at least the beginning of one, on Friday. But Kaylee, I wonder if we're getting a better sense of the posture that Joe Biden will take specifically on the issue of Israel in this State of the Union address, having heard from Kamala Harris over the weekend. Joe Biden already said that Israel has gone, quote unquote, over the top, I think was his line when it comes to Israel's response in Gaza. And Kamala Harris now, the vice president, is calling for an immediate ceasefire and did so in Selma, Alabama, a day before she met with Israeli Minister Benny Gantz. Let's listen to Vice President Harris from yesterday.
Given the immense scale of suffering in Gaza, there must be an immediate ceasefire. For at least the next 6 weeks, which is what is currently on the table.
A 6-week pause, Kaylee, that would be a pretty big deal. And of course, Benjamin Netanyahu has made clear that that's not going to happen until they get information on hostages being held.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Doesn't seem like a ton of forward progress is being made at this point in time. But we wanted to really get a check on where we stand, just why these conversations are so difficult. Joining us now is Hagar Shamali. She is now founder and CEO at Greenwich Media Strategies, but was formerly the director for Syria and Lebanon at the National Security Council. Hagar, always great to have you on the show. When we think about these ceasefire talks, obviously it is not just Israel and Hamas that is involved. There are a number of intermediaries as well, Qatar, Egypt, the U.S. Which party is bringing the difficulty to these talks? Is this more on Israel's end or Hamas's end?
Oh, without a doubt, it's Hamas's end. Right now, the latest proposal is a 6-week ceasefire that would be temporary. It would include an additional amount of humanitarian aid brought into the country, and it would include about, the latest numbers, at least though they shift on a daily basis, are 40 Israeli hostages who would be released for about 400 Palestinian prisoners. But like I said, those numbers really do change on a day-to-day basis. But they are still allegedly considering that request, and they've turned down the last 2 proposals that Israel was in agreement to. So it's on Hamas. The ball is in Hamas's court as we see it right now, and that is really what Vice President Harris was honing in on. That is what she was talking about. She was calling for an immediate ceasefire, but that is what she was referencing. She's referencing this deal that's on the table for 6 weeks. She wants both parties to come to it immediately and to include that the parts of the deal that include a prisoner hostage swap, and also humanitarian aid, additional humanitarian aid going into Gaza.
Some reports, Hagar, say that Prime Minister Netanyahu wants to know about the hostages' well-being, their condition now, and how many are still alive before moving forward. Does Hamas have all of that information?
The Hamas that I know, because I worked in counterterrorism in the US government and Hamas was in my portfolio, the Hamas I know should know that information and would know that information because they have control over Gaza completely. And even though you have other terrorist groups, obviously you have Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which we know has taken hostages, it doesn't mean that Hamas doesn't know where they are or their state. It just means that it may not be within their complete power to negotiate them or to exchange them without including other deals on their side between Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad is going to try and get something out of that as well for themselves. And so that's really more, I would never believe when Hamas says that they just don't know the state of something or they don't know where someone is being held. That I find that very hard to believe. I understand that in a war zone it could be different, but they have ways of communicating then, and technically this is an area that has always been under their thumb since 2006. And so I don't see why that they wouldn't know that now.
So, Hagar, you say that Hamas effectively has control over everything in Gaza, so we should also keep that in mind, that it is Hamas's run health ministry in Gaza that is reporting these figures. But we're now talking about 30,000 Palestinian deaths. And even now that the administration seems to have ramped up its rhetoric, we just heard Vice President Harris there talking about this as a humanitarian catastrophe. Has the U.S. reached this point too late?
This is really important. I'm glad you asked about this because the issue that you have at hand here, the reason the United States hasn't called for a permanent ceasefire and the reason that they still aren't calling for a permanent one is because they don't want to give any kind of gift to Hamas. They don't want to give a ceasefire without anything in exchange. For example, the hostages in particular. This could all end tomorrow if Hamas gave all the hostages back. And so that's what's holding them back. But with the U.S., you can see, number one, they've shifted their tone publicly, right? And you saw that ever since the Jordanian king's visit, where Biden came out stronger. He said Israel's behavior has been over the top. He tried to show more compassion for the Palestinians and feel more and show more empathy for their pain. And since then, we've seen the rhetoric grow, but particularly since the tragic event that happened on Friday, where you had Palestinians who were there for a humanitarian convoy. There was gunfire and over 100 were killed. And each side has their story, but the fact is that it doesn't even really matter. When democracies are at war, this is not supposed to happen. And that's why President Biden came out and said that there is no excuse. There's no justification from the Israeli government side on what happened on that tragic day. So that said, why do you see the U.S. pushing for this 6-week ceasefire? That is because they're trying to push for something that could lead to a permanent ceasefire, but to do it in a way where A, they get the hostages out and get something in exchange without giving something a freebie the way they view it to Hamas, because ultimately there's one goal here, and that's that Hamas is not able to govern Gaza any longer. And so if you have that 6-week ceasefire, they can kickstart or expedite negotiations on one hand between the Israelis and Palestinians to ensure who controls Gaza, and on the other between the Israelis and the rest of the Middle East to have normalization deals to try and kickstart a two-state solution. Now, I know I sound like that sounds impossible. It is a very tall order, but that is what the U.S. government is hoping to do.
Hagar, we only have a minute. You worked on the National Security Council. I wonder your expectation for Joe Biden on Thursday night, the administration's message on Israel. This is a political speech, of course, but it's one that's being driven in part by folks like you who now work in the White House who are briefing him every day.
Well, I believe he'll continue this tougher tone against Israel's behavior, but he's also going to be very careful to remind everyone that Israel is an ally and why Israel is an ally, that we benefit enormously for our own counterterrorism objectives from Israel. And so I think he'll try and toe that line and be very careful about it. But on the question of ceasefire, I think they're going to hit this point much harder about calling for an immediate ceasefire, even if it's temporary, that the goal is to lead into a permanent ceasefire, but the only way to do that is to not allow Hamas to govern Gaza any longer. So I think he's going to explain that a bit better.
I wonder if he gets both sides of the room up off their seats for that one. Hagar Shamali, great to see you, Hagar. Again, formerly National Security Council on Syria and Lebanon, founder as well of Greenwich Media Strategies. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington alongside Kaylee Lyons. We'll have much more to follow here on Balance of Power, the fastest show in politics, live from Washington. This is Bloomberg.
listening to Balance of Power with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
The Spirit Airlines tag is home of the Bear Fare, as I see in the photograph here on the terminal. The essence of low fare, like that's where you pay to go put your bag in the overhead, right?
Right. You pay for a lot of things, actually. Yeah. But the base fare is cheap.
Okay. Well, it is. And apparently Spirit is not going to be joining hands with JetBlue. I was wondering if that was going to become a thing across the combined airline. Maybe at some point we're like strap hangers like on the subway, just all standing up on the airplane. That could be the next level here.
Not sure how well that would go down with the FAA, but I do see your point. It's two discount carriers we're talking about here. They were trying to combine to become more competitive with the bigger guys. Think American, United, Delta, for example. And it didn't go very well from an antitrust perspective. Now, JetBlue decided to walk away from this $3.8 billion agreement.
More than a month after a federal judge blocked the almost $4 billion marriage. And George Ferguson is with us. We talked about Boeing on Friday. He's back with us from the world of aerospace, where he is senior analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence. George, it's good to see you. I guess we could have seen this coming, but I have to get back to Kaylee's point here. Is this somehow a commentary on the Biden administration's allergy when it comes to antitrust?
I think it is. And thanks for having me on as usual. But I do think it is. So the combined carrier would have been the 5th largest carrier in the U.S. behind American, United, Delta, Southwest. I don't see that it would have taken up a large, amount of market share enough to change fares. We're already in an environment where budget fares are under pressure. Airlines are profitable, but they're not profitable like they were back in the last decade. So I don't really see why the Biden administration had a problem with this acquisition. And so, yes, I think it was really just a function of them not wanting to take the complaints about airfares that I think that constantly come into every administration. It seems airfares are always too high for the traveling public.
Well, George, if we take this way back to before it was JetBlue that agreed to buy Spirit, it used to be a kind of love triangle, if you will, because Frontier was involved as well. But if this really is about an administration being reluctant to see any companies getting together, is there an opportunity for Frontier here to come back into the mix, or is that a non-starter?
That's, I think, a really interesting question, right? Because I think, frankly, a merger or acquisition by Frontier would have been a much better fit for this airline. The cultures are very, very similar, and we could see, Spirit's got some near-term debt coming 2025. It may be very difficult for them to sort of, weave the eye of the needle here and satisfy their debt holders that they're going to be able to pay, ultimately push out some of that debt and keep the airline going. So I would even think it would have been in the government's interest to either let an acquisition from a JetBlue or a Spirit go through, because it keeps Spirit more viable. Or an acquisition from Frontier go through, because it keeps Spirit more viable. I do think there's a chance for them to step in here, but the administration seems to be against any kind of merger, like you said.
You talk about something, George, that pretty much all of our viewers and listeners can relate with, and that's the incredibly high level of airfares right now. It really just doesn't matter where you're going, if it's domestic or international. We see the Federal Reserve calling it out. We've seen the administration calling them out. A lot of this, I realize, has to do with getting things back together in terms of capacity post-COVID. But this is a good issue for the President of the United States. You must have a sense of this, how long airlines can maintain fares like these when they try to increase capacity. What can you tell us about it?
So my sense is that airlines are going to have to keep fares here, right? So the problem in the industry, it's inflation. It comes back to inflation. The problem in the industry is the pilots just cut some great, contract, forward contracts. They got, some of them gotten the 20% increases initially, and then, 4s and 5% per year. So even though fares seem high to the traveling public right now, like I said, the airlines aren't making the profits they were making last decade, because wages are consuming a larger portion of that. And so to me, that fares have to stay here. In fact, if fares get soft, if they start coming down, I think the airlines would have to cut capacity and try to prop those fares up, because they can't let things go too much further or they'll be in the red. And in the red doesn't work very well long term either.
I bet George knows all, like you buy the second Tuesday of the month 3 weeks before there's all the secrets out there, right, George? You got to tell us sometime how to do this.
6 weeks out on Tuesday at around 2 o'clock.
I knew it.
It's
wow,
like the
around
points
2
guy
o'clock. I love that.
of Bloomberg Intelligence.
Yes.
I need to go put some markings on my calendar real
That was
quick.
so cool. George Ferguson, way to land the plane. That was impressive.
Land the plane. Did you do that on purpose?
I did. I'm sorry.
That was quite punny.
We're almost done. Thank you, George.
And it's about the time of the day where we take our puns and we send them on over to New York, because Tim Stenovec and Sonali Basak today are about to take the wheel with Bloomberg Business Week. And guys, it's another day in which we find ourselves talking about a deal that either is facing antitrust scrutiny or has actually died because of antitrust scrutiny. That's the case with JetBlue and Spirit, of course, but you could also talk about Capital One, Discover Financial, Kroger, Albertsons. I mean, there's a laundry list.
We know Wall Street cares about this stuff. Do you think voters pay attention to this stuff? Do we have any polling that says that voters, that this moves the needle
Antitrust?
at all? Yeah, do they?
All they know is that airline fares are too damn
Exactly.
high. I think that's the only takeaway here, right?
Does this keep them lower? That's the question.
Totally. Well, especially the administration pushing this idea that it's all about corporate price gouging and the big guys, hurting the little guys. Maybe that just kind of feeds into that narrative.
Okay, well, look, I don't have a great transition to what's coming up, but if things finish in the green, it's another record, and we're going to also talk a little bit about private credit. How's that?
Go, Tim.
Perfect.
Sonali Basak on the way as well. Bloomberg Business Week starts right now.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good afternoon, everyone. We're live on Bloomberg TV on radio. We're streaming on YouTube on Bloomberg Originals. I'm Tim Stenovec, along with Bloomberg Wall Street reporter Sonali Basak, in for Carol Masser this afternoon. And here's the setup on this Monday, March 4th, 2024. Stocks taking a bit of a breather after the S&P 500 is at 15 records just this year. Maybe it's because traders are waiting to hear from Fed Chair Jay Powell this week, as well as seeing those employment numbers on Friday. But Sonali, as you just reminded me, if we finish in the green today, it'll be the 16th record just this year for the S&P 500.
Yeah, and you have the S&P 500 holding up, could hit a record today. You have other indices facing a little bit more pain, the NASDAQ 100 being one of them. Remember, we have some big losers today, Apple, Tesla. Yeah. We'll talk about more of that later this hour. We have yields on the rise as well, but critical economic data ahead. Also on the show, Tim, we're going to go talk about other things on Wall Street, hiring. We're going to talk about DEI practices in particular, because what's interesting here is it's changing quickly. In some ways, Tim, it looks like it's ending as quickly as it began.
Yeah, looking forward to that conversation. It is today's big take. We're also going to check in on the so-called race to the bottom when it comes to private credit. We're going to do that with the head of leveraged finance research and analytics over at Moody's Investor Service.
And we're going to also talk about ESG in another way. We're going to talk about sustainability. While that has been a hard thing to track in public markets, we have some instances here led by Carlyle initially, and now dozens of other private equity firms are finding ways to share data. Tim, we'll talk about that and make some advances on ESG.
If it sounds like Sonali knows a lot about that story, it's because she's the one who actually wrote it. So I'm excited about that one later in the hour. First up, a check on the day's trade and top business stories. Here's Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much. And here's what's going on. We've got red on the screen right now as this rally takes a breather. Traders are awaiting this week's batch of jobs data and remarks from Fed officials as they look for clues about the path of interest rates. So here's where we stand. Red on the screen now with the S&P lower, a little change, down less than a point right now. We've got the Dow down 91, decline there of 0.2%. The Nasdaq Composite Index down 27, a drop there of 0.2%. 10-year yield 4.22% with a 2-year that's now yielding 4.60%. Spot gold up 1.5% right now, higher by $31, 21.14. West Texas Intermediate crude oil down 1.5%, 78.73 a barrel. Bitcoin big story today, it is surging 5.8%. Bitcoin now at 66,509 on Bitcoin. JetBlue has formally abandoned its pursuit of Spirit Airlines more than a month after a federal judge blocked the $3.8 billion acquisition on antitrust grounds. The carriers say they reached an agreement to walk away after determining that required legal and regulatory approvals were unlikely to be met by dates specified in the deal. JetBlue shares, they are up 2.2%. Spirit is lower by 11.7%. Finally, American agreeing to buy 260 short-haul aircraft that include a massive deal for Boeing 737 MAX jets. Again, recapping, stocks lower, little change for the S&P right now, down by 0.5 point. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Hey, thank you so much for that update, Charlie Pellet. Well, as I mentioned, count it, 15. That's how many records the S&P 500 has hit so far this year. And yes, it is only the beginning of March. As Charlie mentioned, the rally taking a bit of a breather. We're going to get the February jobs report on Friday, and before that, we'll hear from Fed Chair Jay Powell. On Wednesday, he'll testify before the House Financial Services Committee, and then Thursday, he'll testify before the Senate Banking Committee. Oh, and then there's Super Tuesday tomorrow, President Biden's State of the Union address on Thursday. So it's a packed week. We've got a great roundtable on what to watch for this week on the equity side and also when it comes to all of the economic data and Fed speakers. So let's get to the interview. Michael McKee is Bloomberg News international economics and policy correspondent, and Abigail Doolittle is a Bloomberg News markets reporter. They're both here in the Bloomberg studio. Abigail, I want to start with you because 15 records on the S&P 500 so far this year. We just heard the number from Charlie about Bitcoin approaching all-time highs. We're having some analysts come out and use the word froth to describe some parts of the market here. What are you seeing in terms of this rally getting ahead of itself or going too far too fast?
Well, we've had an ongoing bearish divergence, which the S&P 500 going higher, all these record highs, and yet it's on less bullish momentum than the previous record highs. So the record highs made back in December was an RSI of, I think it was almost close to 80. The current RSI, I was just pulling it up, is closer to 70. So it's still overbought, so that looks bullish, but there's a series of lower highs there while we have a series of higher highs on the S&P 500. It's just a fancy way of saying that the current buyers of this rally, they're a little bit weaker, weak hands. Now, I think it also has to do with Apple, which we've been talking about. Apple's now officially in a correction from its peak. It's down about 12%. Lots of different factors there. I think the biggest one is the fact that Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway started selling last year. We don't know if they're selling in this current quarter. We'll know in a couple of months, but I suspect that they are. But fears around China. Speaking of China, but the Apple point is really important because it's the second biggest weighting. So it's interesting that the S&P 500 is not tanking. Apple's actually having its worst day since the beginning of January. But on China, we have the NASDAQ Golden Dragon Index down right now 4%, the worst day since August or June of last year. And I'm searching for why. You know, this index is now down. The Chinese indexes have been down about 4 years in a row. So there's another divergence. You have the world's largest and second largest economies, their stock markets doing two totally different things. That cannot last forever. So at some point, we're going to have reconciliation between Apple and the S&P 500, and I would say China and U.S. stocks.
You know, it's interesting, too, because as we look at specific names and their impact on the market, we're also looking at specific economic data throughout the week and some really big moments, including the Fed chair's testimony to Congress.
There's a specific name.
Very specific name. It's interesting, Mike, how much is there volatility going into these events? Because you look at last week and the 2-year dropped down to 455 or so, and you're shooting back up past 460 now. Do you think that there's still a lot of room to move this week?
I don't think there's a lot of room to move, but there's certainly some room to move and some reason to expect volatility when Powell testifies on Wednesday. Second day on Thursday usually doesn't produce as much, but people are going to be looking to him to really set the tone going forward. Everybody knows they're not going to do anything at the March meeting, but what are they going to signal about, A, how many or how many cuts they're going to do this year, if they're still going to do them, and when they might do that. He's probably not going to say anything new, but there's always the possibility that they get some kind of hint or walk away from it with some kind of hint that will push data some way, one way or another. We also have the same day as Powell starts talking, we have the ADP report, which, as Carol Massar always likes to say, she's not here today.
What is she
say it? So we'll say it for her. People trade on it because they trade on about it, there's no reason to. So.
Well, you know, there's another big moment after that. Even the week ends with a bang with the payrolls, right? With the jobs report. How much could that create volatility to kind of throw off the whole beginning of the week, frankly?
It would probably have to be a real surprise, either in the number of jobs created, and right now the Bloomberg consensus estimate is 200,000. It'll probably come out somewhere around that level. And the unemployment rate's not supposed to move, it's supposed to be 3.7%. We'll keep an eye also on average hourly earnings. The Fed wants to see those continue to fall a little bit, and we've had this inflation scare in the last PCE and CPI indexes, so they'll want to make sure that we're not seeing wage-driven inflation as well. But I suspect after Powell will set the template for what we're going to be thinking about until the May meeting. And so it would take a lot for the jobs report to move the needle, I think, in the markets.
Which one's more important, Mike, this week? 2 days of testimony from Jay Powell or February's jobs report on Friday morning?
Unless it's a big surprise on Friday, I think it's going to be Jay Powell, because the question on Wall Street is with their interest rates, and he's going to be able to answer that question.
We know what he's going to say.
We know pretty much what he's going to say, but I mean, if you have the jobs report, you have to impute your own conclusions to it, whereas Powell could come right out and say it.
Okay, Abigail, I kind of want to ask you the same question here, you know, not with regard to specific equities or to the market, but with regard to all the data that we're getting this week. From your perspective, what's most important?
I would agree with Mike. It's going to be Fed Chair Jay Powell. Usually, to my memory, he's not so market moving relative to this testimony, but there have been a couple of years where it's not just him, but also thinking back to Yellen and even Ben Bernanke back in the day. It's something that I remember, and I don't know if you remember this, Mike, but sometimes I find that one of these Fed chairs will say something on the first day, which is either bearish or bullish, and then kind of walk it back a little bit the next day, so you just have some volatility. But it'll be interesting to see what he says. It would be, when's the last time, Mike, that because every now and then he does pull a surprise, and I feel as though he did use this congressional term 2 years ago, where it was like the reverse Powell pivot. It was one of these.
In 2019, certainly, they kind of reversed what
Yes,
they were
he
doing.
did at the beginning of January.
I suspect
with
that,
Ben Bernanke.
I suspect that what we'll get from Powell is more of the same.
Yeah.
But his last comments on 60 Minutes sort of set the stage for that.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
Everybody has talked. You got to go back to December when he said we talked about cutting interest rates, and everybody took that to mean they're about to cut interest rates, and then they had to keep walking that back slowly in the 60 Minutes interview, and then everybody that has spoken since then.
Yes.
And that, well, I was just going to say, Sonali, that has not had any effect, at least on the equity market, because the equity
But it
market
has on bonds.
has marched higher.
I mean, today, we take a look at yields. We have that 2-year yield up 7 basis points back at a 4.6. You have that 10-year yield up 4 basis points. Last week, I think, over the last month, they were up like 40 or 50 basis points, both of these yields. So there has been some effect there. But the thing is, stocks have already absorbed these levels. I mean, the 2-year yield had been at 5.25. So liquidity is still relatively, it's, 75, 50 bips better than it had been. So stocks are doing okay.
You know, it's interesting. We're kind of mostly through earnings season now, but we still have some names coming through the surface today. Exactly. So what can we hear this week, especially because they're so levered to the consumer and people are really worried about the consumer?
That's a great point. And I was about to call it Target again. Target's really underperforming. I mean, over the last year, I believe it is down. I'm just going to do a quick search on this. I mean, they've had some real idiosyncratic issues, but they are, to your point, a tell on the broader consumer. So it's going to be we really have to wait to see what they put up. But in terms of that stock over the last year, it has been down, not tremendously, but down 9%, whereas the S&P 500 over that time period up about 30% or so. So if they say something positive, I don't think we're going to get that much more juice. If they're negative from a macro standpoint, that could be something to set off a little bit of selling for stocks.
It will be interesting to see what they say about their inventories. And I was going to make a joke because, as I say, the Target near me had an inventory problem because they put a whole bunch of snow sleds on sale, and we didn't have any snow in New York, so they're stuck with that
Until the
inventory.
one Saturday that we
That's
do.
also such a small, that's
But-
a mini Target.
Yeah, it's
So
a
they shouldn't have any
yeah.
New York
But-
City is not the best.
But the ISM report last week and the inventories numbers we got for wholesale and retail in the last week have suggested that inventories are low, and that should start to mean people